Sup everybody, this is Willie and welcome to another video. And today I'm going to be reviewing on a Netflix show, Dragon's Rescue Riders, which is a series that has a lot of mixed reaction to it. Some of the audience love it while others despise it. And I do understand the rationale there because it's a show targeted towards a younger audience and not catered towards our kind. This show builds off the success of the original How to Train Your Dragons, but in this show, they make it as a more juvenile TV product, simply targeted towards the younger side of the fan base. This factored a lot of discourse online about this simply because it just isn't any kind of show that favors towards the original How to Train Your Dragons fan base, so we don't get the nostalgic feeling for it. And also, since the universe of this show does not take place in the same universe as the original How to Train Your Dragons, so that makes it non-canon to it. I did decide to give this show a chance to maybe get an understanding of what this show is really presenting and see how much it utilizes and connects with the original How to Train Your Dragons. And coming into it, I was a little iffy and hesitant to watch it simply because the animation and quality was pretty hit or miss. And I will say after watching the first season, I actually really enjoyed some of it. There's things that I like what this show did and there are some things that I dislike about it. But either way, it was kind of like a good infancy way of introducing the How to Train Your Dragons franchise to a younger audience, even though it really isn't universally connected to the main series. But with that said, I will only be reviewing the Netflix series of this show, so I won't be talking about Heroes of the Skies considering it moved to Peacock as its program instead of Netflix. So I'll do a separate video on that series, but I'll just be mainly talking about the Netflix series. So we have 2 seasons and 3 specials to discuss on. But before I talk about the series, I should start introducing you to the main characters who have a major impact and relevancy on the show. So let's start with the Dragon Riders. First off, we have Layla, who is my personal favorite of the two because I actually really connect with her well and she has a pretty interesting story arc along the way. And I do really love Layla's passion for adventuring because that's what this show is all about. Next up, we have Dak, who's obviously the other twin, and I will say, in the early seasons, he can come off a bit cringy sometimes, and I did not really care too much about him. But he did grow on me as we progressed throughout the series, to where I find his story arc more palpable. Now that we got all the Dragon Riders out of the way, now it's time to talk about the dragon. And first off, we obviously have to talk about Winger. And he's a blue Swiftwing dragon, who is obviously this show's counterpart of Toothless from the OG series. And I am on par with the fanbase who generally finds him as the best dragon character from Rescue Riders. For me, every time I watch Rescue Riders, it's because I just love Winger and he is just such a great dragon that I enjoy his character development and arc. And it makes it fun when he gets most of the spotlight on the show. And sometimes his humor can be fun at points. But with that, he's easily the best character. Let's move on to the next dragon. So next, we have Summer, who is a fast fin, and she's a water dragon. I really like how she's shown like a sisterly figure to the team, and she's another very likable character showing a lot of charisma and care for her group. Next, we have Aggro, who is an interesting figure as she's a late addition to the Rescue Riders group since she doesn't join until episode 4 of season 1. But she's a fire fury, and she's another decent, compelling character on the show, and she really has an intriguing relationship with another dragon that I'll talk about soon. And the one main thing to really get note from her is that fact that she dislikes being called little, even though that is the truth about her. Next, we have Cutter, who was the dragon I was describing as having an intriguing relationship with Aggro. And he's a relentless Razorwing. As a character, he's fine, but he tends to get a little overconfident, which can annoy me a bit, but still drops some humorous lines along the way. And lastly, we have Burple, who is a rock spitter, and I never personally cared about him throughout the show. He tends to be such an aloof at everything, which could make him fun, but for me, it kind of annoyed me a lot. Another thing with Burple is that the show actively loves to give him a lot of the spotlight, because I guess they want the audience to feel sympathetic for him for being a kind of the outlier of the team. But even with the amount that they give Burple the spotlight, I still couldn't even connect with him or click with him at all, and I just found Burple to be a character that the show wants to be its comedic relief, but I can't seem to gel with his humor. But anyways, that's the cast of characters. Now let's get to the first season of the series. Let's start off with the first episode, which is called The Nest. And this episode obviously starts with the controversy in the first few minutes when the dragons speak. which is something to take note of here, is that in Rescue Riders, the dragons can actually talk, like they can say dialogues and stuff. And this caused a lot of outrage in the dragon community, to where many people who tried to give this show a chance immediately withdrew as soon as the dragon spoke. And for me, it was just a weird decision, and although it has grown on me since, I was kind of like unamused by this element. But either way, let's get into the episode. So we see the crew just flying through a rainstorm, and they have an egg that they need to return to a nest. They struggle a little bit on the way, but thankfully they make it to the nest, and Burple deposits the egg before the wind blows him back and he collides into the crew. So they're on their way back, but then Cutter suddenly sees a man hanging onto a sinking shipwreck. So the dragons rescue him and they find a cave to shelter from the rain. The man introduces himself as Duggard, who is the chief of Huttsgalor, and he plays a major role on the show as well, and he has some very powerful moments, especially one at the end of season 2 that I will talk about soon. But anyways, the rescue riders introduce themselves to Duggard, and this is when Layla and Dak talk about their story of being rescued by a shipwreck by Winger's mother, and that's when they were raised by her and Winger. And that necessitates on why they're able to communicate with the dragons. Duggard is fearful of the dragons at first, but he eventually gets used to them due to their friendliness. So with that, Duggard decides to invite them to his town, Huttsgalor. The twins do question if the people are going to accept the dragons, and Duggard claims his people are the nicest, kindest, and accepting people in the world, and we cut to them being super hesitant on the presence of the dragons. But we are introduced to some relevant characters among them. First, we have Haggis, who is Duggard's sheep. Hennar, who is a blacksmith, who is a very useful asset to the team. And last but not least, we have Magnus, who sucks. He's clearly the antagonistic figure, and he tries to have many plans but flops at them each time he attempts to execute them. And most of that stems from his disliking of dragons. And we do see here that Magnus is trying to preach to the villagers that the dragons are going to bring danger to the town. Which is funny coming from him, but anyways. The villagers decide to accept them for one day, and the dragons decide to help assist them in cleaning up the mess around it. Then Magnus brings in Auto Lumberjack machine in an attempt to make it more worthy than the dragons themselves. And he attempts to use it in a forest, but when he overpowers it, it malfunctions and goes haywire, which was very reckless on Magnus's part. But now, because of the chaos of his machine, it's launching logs out of the forest, and a bunch of logs rain onto Huttsgalor and damaging a lot of the villager houses. That's when the dragons team come to help. Some of them stay back in the town to protect the people from the logs, while Dak and Wayne go after the machine that's causing all of this. And this eventually leads to a dramatic sequence of them struggling to stop the machine, where it would eventually end when Dak lands onto the machine and pulls his lever repeatedly until it crashes onto a tree, and Winger saves him as he's launched out, just as the tree falls down and destroys the machine. But with that, the Dragons team saved the day. So the day is about to end, and just as the team is about to leave the town, the villagers urges them to stop because they don't want them to leave. And this is when Duggard declares that they are officially allowed to stay at Huttsgalor. They will be residing into an old abandoned lighthouse, which will now be known as the Roost. The team accepts it, and they are now officially part of Huttsgalor. And this is where episode 1 concludes. For me, this was a pretty mixed episode. Obviously, it's one iconic one considering it's the start of the series. But despite some positives, it doesn't really negate the fact that this episode's first few minutes stirred a lot of outrage about the dragons having the ability to speak and other stuff, which is very understandable when looking at it in that kind of lens. But either way, it was a decent episode, and now let's get to the next one. Here's the second episode, Deep Trouble. And we begin with the dragons just flying around until Dak has officially set up a minigame for them to compete in, to where a dragon needs to hit a red target that is surrounded by blue targets. Burple flops miserably, and Cutter only hits the blue targets. Then it's Summer's turn, and Dak continuously distracts her. But then they decide to test if Winger's able to do it, in which he is successful with. Afterwards, the team decide to go to head out, and then that's when they spot Elbone in town, who I haven't acknowledged yet, but he is a humorous figure across the series, and he has this funny relationship with a rock who he names Rocky, which is literally a drawing of a face on a rock. But let's get back to the point. Elbone is carrying a lot of things because he plans to head through the maze caves of Mount Huttsgalor to get to the north side of the island. The team follow Elbone into the maze caves before he enters it, but first, Cutter lights up his lantern because obviously Elbone didn't think of that at first. Then he embarks his journey into the cave, where everyone is uncertain if he is going to be okay traveling by himself, which we'll see how this goes. Anyways, we cut to the next day, and we see the team just hanging out in town until they're approached by Duggar, who asks them about the lack of Elbone's presence, and this is when they explain to him that he had ventured into the maze caves, to which Duggar grows a lot of concern, explaining the whole issues about those caves, where Elbone could potentially get lost in there. So we have Dak, Winger, Cutter, and Burple deciding to go find him. Dak, Winger, and Cutter enter the cave, but Burple decides not to and retreats back to the roost. So the three are searching for Elbone in the cave, and they get lost easily too. They do spot a dropped lantern, which obviously belonged to Elbone, and Cutter lights it, and while he does that, he leaves a burn mark on the wall, which let's see how relevant that becomes later on the episode. We cut back to the roost, where Burple returns and informs Layla and Summer that Dak and Winger and Cutter entered the cave to find Elbone, which they do get worried about. We return with Cutter, Winger, and Dak, and they're just flying around in circles in the cave, and they keep arriving at the burn mark Cutter made, which alarms them that they have just been going to the same place over and over and over again. They do eventually hear a sound, and they follow it, and that's when they finally bump into Elbone, who was clearly lost and relieved that he saw them again, but was unaware that they are lost too. Dak assumes that the map that Elbone made that he would write on his way would help them get them out of the cave, but turns out Elbone didn't draw a map while he was in the cave. Instead, he illustrated tic-tac-toe games that he played with Rocky. So that wasn't really bright of him, but it was kind of funny. We're back at the roost, and we see Layla just making some rescue plans, and that's when Duggar enters and informs them that they only have a few hours left, considering once it hits the full moon, the tides are going to be rising up in the underground. And with Elbone, Cutter, Dak, and Winger in the underground, they're subjected to trouble with the flash flood that's approaching them. This news finally incentivizes Layla, Summer, and Burple to get into rescue action. And once they were at the front entrance of the cave, they have an idea of tying a rope to a tree near the opening so they'll have an easier time finding their ways out of the maze cave. So now we see Layla, Summer, and Burple searching for the team. Meanwhile, Elbone, Dak, Winger, and Cutter are finding their ways out of the cave, and they're flying in circles once again, returning to the same burn mark Cutter made. And this is when we see water beginning to rise, so that adds more suspense to the scene. Then another catastrophe happens, and the rope that Layla, Summer, and Burple were using to tether was too short, so they now have to forfeit their ropes and continue on without it, despite it being their only hope in guiding them out of the cave. Then we see Dak instruct Winger to use his power blast, but to no avail, but the sound of the power blast is able to guide Layla, Burple, and Summer into their direction. But there are so many rock walls blocking their way, so that's when Layla instructs Burple to do a barrel roll, in which he does a lot of times until he breaks to the final wall that allows the team to reunite. And together, they're all able to find their way out of the cave, following the directions of the rope that Layla, Burple, and Summer used. The team drops off Elbone back into town with his pet rock, Rocky, and they leave to return back to the roost, and the episode ends. This was a very thrilling episode because there was a lot of suspense when it came to the cave sequence, especially when the tide came into play, which added more thrill to the episode. Now we're moving on to episode 3, Boo to You, which is the first of the many Burple-centric episodes. Great. But it first starts off with the team doing a training, with this time having Burple being a scared dragon stuck in a tree. But he literally has wings that he can use to fly down. Initially, Burple is pretending to be scared of heights, but then he actually expresses that he is truly scared. But anyways, the team heads over to Huttsgalor, and we see the villagers scaring each other and decorating the town with pumpkins and spooky props because they're going to be celebrating Hugin, which is Halloween related. And we see the townspeople having fun spooking each other. But then we see Cutter confidently claim that he isn't afraid of anything, which we'll see about that, and Burple is pretty scared. But we do see Layla try to cheer him up, stating that Hugin is just for fun. But then we get a dramatic entrance from Marina, who is a pretty unique character across this series. And we see her explain the story of Hugin being a concept to keep away the Phantom Fang, which can be a myth, but we'll see how it goes. Anyways, the story of the Phantom Fang really terrifies Burple. And because of that, we do see him having nightmares about it, and he decides to take a walk outside. When it's nighttime, which wouldn't that make it worse for him? I don't know what Burple was thinking. But anyways, we see Burple's outside, which is very foggy and windy, so he hears a lot of creepy sounds until he spots Haggis, who then begins to float, and that's when Burple assumes his Phantom Fang and fires rocks at it. And the rocks are able to struck it and let go of Haggis. And Burple and Haggis run back into the roost, waking up the dragons and Burple informing them that they are being under attack. But as soon as Burple mentions it was Phantom Fang, everyone doesn't believe him and is just irritated by him assuming that he was just having another nightmare. To which I can actually feel for him in some way. It's now the next morning, and we see that Burple has stayed up for the rest of the night, which everyone once again has the assumption that it was because of his dreams. But after hearing the stories of Phantom Fang, Winger and Dak try to use this as an opportunity to frighten Cutter, but Cutter sees right through it and they fail miserably. Next, we see Layla, Summer, and Burple are outside, which is very foggy, and Burple sees a pair of levitating red eyes coming towards him, which scares him off, but he crashes into a tree repetitively. Layla and Summer hear him and come to his aid. Then the three of them decide to go to the village and get some information out of Marina, if Phantom Fang is even real, in which she insists it is. That scares Burple even more. But she calms him down once she mentions that Phantom Fang is only fearful of lights, which relieves Burple at first until Marina mentions again that Phantom Fang is a red-eyed demon, which Burple saw red eyes earlier, so that quickly diminishes all his courage. So then night falls, and the villagers set up a massive bonfire in the middle of the village. And we see Burple carrying a few logs to add to the bonfire, but Cutter accidentally distracts him, causing him to lose grip of all the logs, and it drops onto Magnus's machine, destroying one of its compartments and squirting blue paint on Magnus and the bonfire, extinguishing it in the process. This worries Burple even more, as the bonfire was the only source of light that can potentially keep away Phantom Fang. And just as they explain that Phantom Fang is not real once again, we see something invisible knocking over barrels, the pumpkins, and crates, which spooks the town. Layla elects to go after it, and she's able to grab onto the invisible creature. It lifts her into the air to try and shake her off, which it's successful at, and she falls, but thankfully Winger saves her. Now, we have Winger bravely standing his grounds, demanding Phantom Fang to show himself by saying, "Phantom Fang, if that is your name, stop immediately." But then, the invisible creature strikes at Winger, knocking him out for a few seconds, which is really sad to see my favorite character face. But now, the Rescue Riders team begin brawling against the invisible creature. They eventually fly into the air to try and search for it, and that's when the invisible creature shows itself to be a dragon, who is called a Slinkwing, and he fires goo at Cutter's wings, debilitating them, but Summer's thankfully able to save him. Now we have Winger and Summer trying to combat the Slinkwing, but they have struggles because he has the ability to turn invisible, and at one point, Summer tries to spew water at him, but it reacts quickly, humorously causing Winger to be squirted by Summer's water, and so they continue to struggle to defeat the Slinkwing, but finally, Burple brings on his courage and collects a few pumpkins and flies into the air, spinning a multitude of pumpkins in various directions until one of them was able to splatter onto the invisible Slinkwing, which the pumpkin mark exposes the location of the invisible Slinkwing. With everyone now being able to see him, the Slinkwing is extremely petty towards Burple being the one to stop him, so he tries to retaliate against him, but Winger is thankfully able to use his power blast and fires it at the Slinkwing. Now he's forced to retreat, but promises that this isn't the last time they are going to see him, which, boy, was that true. Burple is praised as the hero for showing his courage, and the team apologizes to Burple for not believing in him. And before the episode ends, we have one last moment where Cutter claims that he got through Hugenboo without being fearful. So now this time, Marina takes the opportunity to scare him, and she first starts out with a story of eels, which dragons are afraid of. And then suddenly, Burple boos Cutter, and then finally scares him, and he jumps right into the ceiling and admits that Burple got him good. Everyone laughs, and the episode ends like that. This episode was pretty adequate, and it was really good when it would start building up the story of the ghost being actually real, when it turns out this whole time the Phantom Fang was really a Slinkwing who was invisible, which initially scared Burple at first, but he brought his courage along and was able to save the day. So at least there's something good in him. Now we move on to episode 4. Where There's Smoke, which is a very notable episode because it tells the story of how Aggro joined the team. So anyways, the episode starts off with the team returning a boy to his mother, and his name is Finked, who is a fine younger character, and he is pretty likable for the most part. But anyways, we have Duggard instructing the team to help out the local sheep on the north side of the island because there's smoke producing from that side, which really concerns everyone for the sheep's safety. So the team flies over there and they see a straight line of fire barricading the sheep's way to escape because everything else surrounding them are just cliffs leading into the water. So we have the team rescuing the sheep with Summer using her water and Burple using rocks to extinguish the fire. After saving the sheep, the team heads back to town and we just get some random filler moments along the way. But anyways, it's the next day and they're just enjoying some breakfast eating fish when all of a sudden Duggard and Magnus approach them and inform them that another fire has been produced. And then this is when Magnus accuses Cutter of making the fire because he's the only dragon that's able to produce flames. And I feel like Magnus's approach here is to continue his anti-dragon sentiment and to try and demonize one of them so that way he can get everyone to believe that the team of dragons are a danger to the town. So it felt like there was some diabolical motivation Magnus had in this. But the team do everything they can to defend Cutter, and they make promises to prove that Cutter is completely innocent. But now because Magnus accused him of being the culprit, Cutter is now in a more somber mood, which thwarts him from even coming along with the team to put out the fire. So he stays behind at the roost. So the team arrives once again to see another line of fire displayed in front of the sheep. And meanwhile, Burple, Winger, and Dak are taking their time extinguishing the fire. Summer and Layla take time to analyze the alignment of the flames, which leads to a bush, so they assume that the culprit must be close, which they were right once Summer sprays the culprit out of the bush, which reveals to be a red dragon, who's obviously aggro. And she's clearly the one making the fires, so the team goes after her. And Dak and Layla are able to distract her for a bit, revealing that they have the ability to speak dragon, just before Burple lands on her to try and stop her. But that turns out to be a bad idea for him once he describes her as little, which I mentioned at the beginning is one of Aggro's biggest pet peeves. So this causes her body temperature to heat up, which scorches Burple, causing him to fly off her, allowing her to flee. And then we get another chase sequence where all of them fail to catch her, with Burple getting stuck at some point, Summer and Layla losing sight of her, and Dak and Winger being knocked down by smoke that Aggro produced using her wings that she scraped along the ground. But now knowing the truth to prove Thunder's innocent, the team returned back to the roost to rally him because he has the ability to track people using his super eyesight. But Cutter is still reluctant to come along, showing the mood that Magnus really put on him after he falsely accused him. Now Winger comes in and motivates Cutter that he needs to forget about what Magnus said and reminds him that they are heroes that are there to be a team, not to be liked. And this finally convinces Cutter to come along. Cutter uses his super eyesight and spots Aggro hiding behind a boulder of rocks, so the team dives down and corner her, which gives them time to confront her on why she's making fire to scare the sheep, only for her to reveal that it's a complete misunderstanding and that she only made the fire to prevent the wolves from crossing over to attack the sheep. And now with the team extinguishing the fire she made, boy was there trouble gonna come. So then we see a big pack of wolves cornering the herd of sheep, but thankfully the rescue riders comes and helps them. We see Winger continuously power blasting until he runs out. And then we have this humorous scene of Burple barrel rolling into one of the wolves, and then we just have a dramatic slow-mo shot of him colliding with the wolf. But this causes him to be dizzy, and 3 wolves are approaching him, but then Aggro fires flames at them, causing the last of the wolves to run away. The team thank Aggro for helping them out, and that's where she introduces her identity. Then we have the team escorting all the sheep to a safer place, and a team tour Aggro around the roost and invite her to join the team, in which she accepts. But in the final moments, Duggard and Magnus return to the roost, only for the team to ask Magnus for an apology because he falsely accused Cutter of doing it when in reality it was Aggro. Much to his dismay, learning another dragon will be present, but Duggard is accepting of her, and the episode concludes with that. Like I said, this is a very remarkable episode because it originates the story of Aggro joining the team, and there was a lot of thrill with the narrative of this episode. Now we jump to episode 5, which is titled Heavy Metal, and it begins with the Rescue Riders doing a race. We see Summer and Layla leading for the most of it until Winger makes a big comeback from behind because he is a swift wing and they are the fastest dragon. So Winger is able to zoom past everyone and win the race. But anyways, after that, we see some disaster happening in the town with many things just falling off like wheels and even Duggar's cup handle. Hanar, who is the blacksmith that usually is able to mend things, informs him that she's out of Belzium, which Belzium is some kind of mineral that is used to strengthen objects together and lessen the fragileness. So Duggar informs the rescue riders to help them find some Belzium. They are delighted to until Magnus butts in, calling the dragons flappy lizards and saying that he wants to test out his new invention, which is a mineral detector. And we humorously see Dak and Winger very bewildered by Magnus's new tack. But now it adds a little bit of a challenge aspect to this search, especially when we see the rescue riders themselves compete with one another for a race to find Belzium first. So everyone races off to find the Belzium, but Layla and Summer stay back because they want to use this as an advantage to get information on the location of Belzium, which they ask Hanar, and she tells them that the mineral is located in a cave. So then we have some brief checks off on each character trying to find the Belzium until we return with Summer and Layla and they spot the cave, but just as they enter, Dak and Winger spot it too and swoops right past them into the Belzium cave. And now we have Summer, Layla, Dak, and Winger trying to all compete against each other to be the first to get the Belzium. Then Magnus chimes into the cave, but then his mineral detector device latches onto one of the hanging Belziums on the ceiling, which suspends Magnus in the air for a bit, so he attempts to pull himself off. But now if that combined with the amount of digging the rescue riders has done, it starts to weaken the state of the cave, which initiates a bit of a cave-in. And what really seals the deal is once Magnus finally pulls himself off the ceiling Belzium, which causes it to loosen its support and falls, nearly crushing Magnus, but thankfully Summer saves him, and now it blocks the only exit of the cave, meaning Winger, Dak, Layla, Summer, and Magnus are trapped inside. Magnus quickly tries to blame the rescue riders for the situation they are all in, when in reality, the rock that's blocking the exit is the one that Magnus tried to grab because he can't do anything right. So how about zip it, Magnus? Anyways, Winger tries to use his power blast to break through the boulder, but instead it ricochets around, scaring everyone. Now their next attempt is to just try and move the boulder, but it's too heavy. So now their only hope is that Cutter, Burple, and Aggro will eventually find them and help move the boulder to freedom. Then the scene cuts to Cutter, Aggro, and Burple just meandering about, not really putting much effort to find anything. So back with the characters trapped in the cave, they all together try to move the boulder again, and this time they're able to open up a little tiny space, and Layla opts to squeeze through it, and she's able to just before it closes in on her. But now that Layla is out, she now rushes to try and call out for Aggro, Burple, and Cutter. And she has a hard time finding them, so she has the idea to climb up a tree so they could find her. And then we return with Dak, Winger, Summer, and Magnus. And we do have this one brief debate moment where Summer and Winger just blaming each other for the situation they're both in, until Dak breaks it up before Winger and Summer apologize to each other for the causes that attributed to the situation they're in. So that was a nice moment. They wing up and we return back to Layla, who's calling out for Burple, Aggro, and Cutter on top of a tree branch, but then she loses her balance and falls off just as Burple saves her. That was convenient timing. So Cutter and Aggro join along Burple and Layla as well, and now they arrive at the entrance of the blocked cave. But both sides struggle to try and move the boulder, so then Layla has the idea to use Magnus's invention to pull the rock out from her side so they can help free the characters trapped in the cave. And she and the other 3 dragons are successfully able to move the boulder, and everyone trapped inside is freed. The rescue riders celebrate their freedom, but they get too distracted by it that they're not aware that Magnus is trying to sneak off with the Belzium. But they do catch him in the act, and we see him trying to roll it down a hill attached to his device, but he trips on a rock and his device loses grip on the boulder, now causing it to speed down towards Huttsgalor. Now the rescue riders are in action. First, Dak tries to instruct Winger to power blast it again, but I guess they didn't learn it from their first attempt and it ricochets again, and which Winger is like, oh, right, But next, we have Aggro attempting to do something, but only her fire powers made it worse. But then we see the Belgium boulder roll straight towards the town, which the villagers see and scream in fear. And we have multiple instances of each rescue rider trying to use different techniques to seize it, until finally Burple makes the final blow by barrel rolling into the ground, causing a lump and the boulder launching into the air before it's embedded into the ground. It was pretty suspenseful, but now on the bright side, the giant boulder of Belgium is enough to provide for the town for a week, and the villagers praise the rescue riders for their commitment. Besides Magnus, who is just bitter, but oh well, that's how the episode ends. For me, this was kind of a fine episode. I mean, it's not really sticking to my mind when I think about season 1, and there are just so many better episodes that kind of overshadowed the storyline of this one, but it's still fine nonetheless. Now we're in episode 6, Iced Out, and it begins with the rescue riders saving both Haggis and Duggard from dangers they were in. And during those sequences, we do see remnants of Aggro feeling like an outcast when she isn't contributing much to the team. What really cements that is when the team needs a fire, in which Aggro is delighted to make one until Burple intercedes by spitting out a rock onto the fire pit, igniting a flame from its spark. This infuriates Aggro enough that she just feels isolated and doesn't want to be part of the group. But we do see Layla consoling her. Then we have Dag instructing Aggro that she has a big mission to do, which is monitoring the fire Burple made so it remains lit. Which, that's very disappointing, especially since the others are just going to be heading out to catch more fish, leaving Aggro behind to just watch some flames lit that she didn't make. But meanwhile, while she's just sitting alone, Alba walks in trying to ask for the rescue riders' help, but Aggro is the only one present at the roost. And because Alba can't speak dragon, there is a bit of a communication barrier between him and Aggro, but at least Aggro is able to understand what Alba is saying. He does present Aggro some ice sculptures he made, which doesn't interest her at first, until he mentions that he has found a frozen dragon egg. And this excites Aggro. And right as Albo suggests they wait for the others to come back, Aggro quickly drags Albo along for her flight on her adventure with him. Which this was obviously for her own pleasure. But anyways, the two head over to an icy area where they find a spot that Albo discovered the frozen dragon egg. And conveniently, since Aggro's a fire fury, she's able to use her flame to melt the ice. But an issue with that is that her fire also caused a crack in the ice platform they're standing on, which breaks the car into different slabs, causing Aggro to fall into the icy river. But she is able to emerge, but now her fire powers has been waned and her wings have been immobilized. And with that, now Elbone, Aggro, and the dragon egg are stuck on the ice slab floating along the stream. We return back to the roost where the others return from their fishing trip, and they discover that Aggro's missing as well as the fire being put out and some ice sculptures melted on the ground. Back with Elbone and Aggro, they try many ways to escape from the slab they're on, but they completely fail every time. The team eventually learn Aggro's whereabouts when they discover that Elbone is also running an ice business, and they do connect the dots that Aggro and Elbone must be in an icy region, considering that there was melted ice present at their roost. So now they're on a rescue action, and we return back with Aggro and Elbone. And the dragon egg that they were holding finally hatches, and it reveals a baby dragon, who would later be identified as a hideous Heatwing, which conveniently has fire abilities, which was needed in a situation the two were in. But after this nice moment, Aggro and Elbone discover that the river is leading to a waterfall, which puts them in a very precarious spot. So their next decision is to now parkour on many of the slabs behind them, so they can get farther away from the waterfall. And it is a bit of a struggle for them, especially now they have to carry the baby dragon along, which at one point Elbone tosses it to Aggro when he's about to bite the dust. So it really shows a caring side of Elbone, which is really nice to see. But anyways, Aggro and Elbone run out of slabs to parkour on, and now they're just trapped on the floating slab headed towards the waterfall. However, there is a glimmer of hope when the baby dragon shoots fire at Aggro, reviving some of her powers back, but it only lasted temporarily and she's unable to continue. They do see the rescue riders flying overhead, but they are unable to get their attention, so the team doesn't see them, unfortunately. But then the two of them have the idea to have the baby dragon fire flames at the rescue riders to signal them where they're at. So they do that, and it takes a couple tries until one of the flames edged by Winger and everyone, and they are surprised just as they turn around and see Aggro and Elbone headed towards the waterfall. They all dive in to save them, and we see Winger first retrieve Elbone and the baby dragon, but Aggro unfortunately goes overboard on the waterfall, but thankfully Cutter is able to use his firepower on her, and her powers revive and then she's able to fly again. This does begin the dynamic between Cutter and Aggro because they are both able to breathe fire. Anyways, we're back at the roost, and both Elbone and the baby dragon are warming out next to the fireplace. And we have the rescue riders giving Aggro an apology for making her feel like a pariah on the team. And Layla does praise Aggro for the adventure she went on because it helped save the life of a hideous heatwing, which Burple assumed was an insult to the baby dragon, but Layla had to correct him and then explain that that's what its species is called, which, come on, Burple. But at least he gave the dragon a name and calls him Heaty, so that's giving him some credit. But anyways, the team decide to get Heaty some more fish, so they head off to get some, and that's how the episode ends. I like this episode. It was just another thrilling one to watch, and especially since you do actually feel for Aggro in some light, as she just joined the team like 2 episodes ago and we haven't seen her contribute much to it, so that's where her feeling of being an outcast stems from. Let's go on to episode 7, Sick Day, and we start off with the team playing their version of volleyball using a rock, which obviously because volleyballs didn't even exist in Dragon times. But anyways, they do lose the rock into the ocean, all because of Burple sneezing. Aggro, Winger, and Cutter try to go retrieve it, but eels begin to emerge, which dragons are obviously afraid of, so they retreat and decide to head home. But on their way, Burple's sneezing symptoms begin to get more severe, so the team brings him back home to rest, and they do some checkup on him, and they deduce that Burple might have contracted the dreaded dragon flu, which we see it worsens Burple as he's sneezing more and spewing rocks out of control. Everyone does get worried about it, but Dak attempts to calm everybody down, claiming that Burple will be well the next day, and this aged pretty badly. As we see the next morning, Layla goes to wake up the dragons, and we see every other dragon but Summer has contracted the sickness. So they bring all the dragons out for some fresh air. And we see the sickness symptoms affecting every ill dragon in the worst possible way. Layla and Summer decide that they can try and get help from Morena since she's traveled to many places. So the girls head off to find Morena while Dax stays behind to take care of the sick dragons. Layla and Summer arrive at Morena's home and they consult with her on information of curing the sickness for the dragons. And Morena tells them that help kelp is a medicine that the dragons can use. But the thing is, the kelp inhabits in the ocean, in which eels live there too, so I think we all know what's going to try and hinder Summer and Layla from getting kelp. Next week do have a heart-to-heart discussion between Summer and Layla where Summer admits that despite her being a fast fin, she is fearful of eels and tells her sob story of her experience with eels as a child. And it is a very heartful story that I feel really bad for her. And we do see Layla console her and builds up her confidence, promising that they will able to succeed as a team. And that ends this very touching scene. But we return back to the roost and see Dak struggling to nurse all the dragons, which it was kind of funny. Back with Summer and Layla, they return back to the spot where they played their volleyball game. And Summer first dives into the water searching for the kelp. And she does find it on the seafloor, and just as she's about to grab it, she is swarmed by nearly several eels, in which it terrifies her to having her resurface out of the water in fear. And Summer feels a lot of sorrow for not having enough bravery towards the eels. But Layla does help Summer soothe her misery and rides Summer into the water so they could work together to retrieve the kelp. Back at the roost, we see Dak completely drained from taking care of the dragons, but with some helpful tip by Winger, he's able to overcome his struggles and get everyone to calm down and nap. We return to the ocean and we see Summer and Layla working their ways around the eels. And then they have the strategy of Summer distracting the eels, so it buys Layla time to collect some kelp and place it into her bag. And the strategy effect is going well until midway, Layla is surrounded and circulated by several eels. But we see Summer finally overcoming her fears and combating all the eels. This gives Layla enough time to swim back to the surface, but an eel snatches her bag of kelp out of her possession, and now she has to resurface completely empty-handed. And then a few moments later, Summer emerges out of the water biting onto the eel that was holding Layla's bag, in which the bag is returned to Layla, and Summer tosses the menacing eel back into the ocean. Layla and Summer hug it out, and they return to the roost to medicate the dragons with the kelp. The team commends Summer for overcoming her fears, and Layla is happy that everyone's gonna recover. Just then, Summer begins to contract some symptoms, which that was such an unfortunate way to end the episode, but alright. The general consensus of this episode was that it's pretty mediocre, it's not really well perceived, but I do actually like it because it does showcase the strong bond between Layla and Summer and how their established relationship has developed over time. And this was kind of an episode that gave Summer the spotlight so the audience can connect with her more as a sympathetic character. Now we go into episode 8, which is Bad Egg. And we start off with Magnus noticing Layla's diary and hatches his plans to get his hands on the diary so he could get information on eliminating the dragons. Next, at the roost, we have Layla just examining some Slinkwing slime, pointing out that it is extremely sticky, which will have some relevancy down the road. Then we have Burple returning to the roost to deliver information that he had discovered a dragon egg, so the team goes to check it out. And it is a big silver egg, which unfortunately no one has information on it, including Layla's diary. So they bring it back to the roost and leave it on an empty nest. Nighttime comes around and everyone crashes out. And it's then revealed to us that the silver metallic egg was actually crafted by Magnus, who was inside it. And this was all a ruse by him, so he could steal Layla's diary, in which he's able to get. But we do get some intrigue as Cutter wakes up unexpectedly to have a midnight snack, in which we humorously see Magnus trying to maneuver his way around the roost to avoid being caught. But knowing Magnus, of course, he's susceptible to blundering, in which he does when he tries to hide back in the egg. But he makes it so blatant that Cutter catches that it's him and decides to handle him by using the Slinkling goo to seal off the crack around the egg, leaving Magnus trapped inside of it. And next, he plays around with the egg, pretty much torturing Magnus, which was humorous to watch. He does leave the egg outside for a bit, but once he returns back out, it's gone, which he then informs everyone on the situation. And that's when Layla finds a claw mark on the wall, which would explain the disappearance of the egg. And then next, Layla does learn that her diary has been stolen, in which it completely devastates her, especially since it's the major resource that can help them decipher on the kind of dragon who made that claw mark. So they decide to try and decipher it without the diary, and that's when Dak concludes that the mark must have been made by a silver-tailed Ironclaw. So the next day, the team flies off to find the Ironclaw's nest. And with the help of Cutter's eyesight, he's able to spot the nest and the fake egg that Magnus is in. But when he tries to take it back, the mother dragon appears and is under the impression Cutter is trying to steal her egg. And before Cutter can even explain, the dragon flings him away. And now she has all the eggs in her protection. Cutter returns back with the team, and it seems like it's a dire situation for Magnus until Winger spots that the mother Ironclaw is sleeping. So that's when the team cultivates an idea. They head over to her nest and clog her ear holes, and they take the chance to retrieve the egg Magnus is in. But then there comes trouble when the Ironclaw's actual eggs hatches and baby dragons emerge crying. But Cutter is finally able to do something good and sing a lullaby to calm down the dragons, which puts them to sleep. Meanwhile, we see Magnus finally escape from the egg he's in and does a very vitriol act of singing an awful lullaby that wakes up both the baby and the mother Ironclaws. Magnus flees and hides somewhere while the mother Ironclaw pursues the rescue riders. Winger takes the driving force and leads the team away. Meanwhile, we see the mother Ironclaw shooting a straight line of fire at the team, and at one point, it strikes Burple and it knocks him down. The team dives down to come to his aid, and they're now cornered by the mother Ironclaw, so they take cover behind some big rock. And because Layla doesn't have her diary, she struggles to remember how to handle Ironclaws, until at one point, Summer spews water at the mother dragon and she just backs away, which quickly explains that silver-tailed Ironclaws dislike water because it weakens their wings. So Summer takes the chance to spray at her, which gives Winger and Dak some time to fetch Magnus. Summer runs out of water And this is where Cutter does something by drilling a hole into the ground, which causes a big portion of water to gush out and startles the mother dragon. I should mention that he did something like this earlier when he was in the town, so it was a nice foreshadowing there. But anyways, Winger and Dak arrive holding Magnus in their hands and presenting to the mother dragon that he was the main culprit who plotted this ruse. But then we have Cutter admitting that he was the main instigator, making these reckless mistakes by playing his jokes on Magnus when he's inside the egg, which he took it a little too far. And in essence, Cutter could have just left the egg sealed but not roll it outside, because in that way it wouldn't have led to them embarking on this intense adventure when it was easily avoidable, but is by his own unforced error. But now that he had admitted it to the mother dragon, she does revolts him and states that he takes his jokes a little bit too far, which was also a foreshadowing earlier when Summer mentioned it to him. And you would think Cutter would learn from this, right? Anyways, the mother dragon departs back to her nest, and Magnus hands back Layla's diary, and they fly home, leaving Magnus behind in the woods, which was good comeuppance for him. Anyways, the team returns back to the roost, and the episode ends like that. Okay, this is kind of a strange episode because it's not really one that would stick to my mind. And it felt like in this episode, many characters just made a lot of unforced errors that caused a bevy of issues to occur in this episode. So anyways, that's kind of my opinions on episode 8. Now we jump to episode 9, which is titled Home Alone, and based on the name, you can obviously distinguish that it is a parody of the 90s film Home Alone, which I always like to watch during Christmas time. And a little spoiler, this episode's plot has a lot of similarities with the film, so there's going to be a lot of references to it. Anyways, the episode begins with the team just collecting some random supplies in the outdoors. But then we have Burple swallowing something what he assumed to be a rock, but it doesn't sit well with his stomach, so he spews it out and it reveals to be a dragon egg, which they find 2 more in the bushes. Which is kind of unfortunate to see these baby eggs be neglected by their guardians. But the rescue riders are willing to take care of them, so they bring the eggs back to the roost. We didn't find out that the eggs were placed in the bushes by Songwings, and this time we see that there's 3 of them, who go by the name Lurk, Snoop, and Visa, who are all pretty hysterical antagonistic characters. And just a little heads up for spoilers, one of those Slinklings would reform themselves and side with the Rescue Riders later on in the series. So yeah. But back to the point, the Slinklings spot footprints that the Rescue Riders made, and so they now have an idea who took the eggs and where to find them. But back in the roost, everyone is settling the eggs just as Duggart enters and reminds the twins that they promised that they would take him on a scavenger hunt to find a new grain storage cave. And so we have Layla, Dak, Winger, and Summer heading off to scavenge with Duggart, leaving the responsibility up to Cutter, Burple, and Aggro to take care of the egg, which that's a lot of trust to put in them after what's happened in the past. But we do see the Slinkwings arrive at the roost and try many ways to get in, but they continue to fail miserably. So they try their next tactic, which is to turn invisible, and they still continue to blunder, and at one point they are finally discovered once Burple barrel rolled into one of them, exposing them as the culprit. So then the Slinkwings have another strategy, and this time Lurk decides to communicate with them. And Lurk deceives them to believing that they are Slinkwing eggs, which unfortunately Burple, Cutter, and Aggro fell for the trick. I can't believe how naive they could be, especially since how hesitant they were about trusting the Slinkwings. But in this case, they decided to hand over the eggs, and the Slinkwings leave with them, with their whole entire motivation to just eat the eggs. Anyways, Cutter checks out Layla's diary because she left it there for them, and he discovers that Slinkwing eggs are green, in which in this case the eggs that they brought to the roost were white with red and blue on them. And this is where I'm like, why didn't you read Layla's diary before you gave up the eggs? You already mentioned you had trust issues with the Slinkwings. Why didn't you just do a little checkup on her diary to ensure that the Slinkwings weren't lying, which they were? But now the 3 of them enact an idea to try and retrieve the eggs back. So while those Slinkwings are flying away with the eggs, Aggro comes in front of them and distracts them for a bit just to allow Cutter to strike them with his spikes, causing all 3 of them to drop their eggs, and they land into Burple's mouth. So now the Slinkwings pursue Burple, and he tries to hide behind a boulder. But all 3 Slinkwings find him, and since he's cornered, he's forced to cough the eggs up, in which the 3 collect them and laugh in Burple's face as they fly away. But we do find out that what Burple really coughed up were rocks that replicated the eggs, in which when Burple returns back to the roost, he regurgitates the real egg, meaning the eggs have been rescued and the plan went successful. And of course we were going to get a segment of the Slinkwings discovering that the eggs they have were really rocks in which it grinds their gears. Well, maybe besides Snoop, who's completely aloof to everything. And also, I never mentioned about the segments with Dak, Layla, Summer, Winger, and Duggard, because they were just completely monotonous to the whole plot of the episode. Besides the final moment where Duggard reveals that he really liked flying with the dragons, in which the twins just tell him that he can just ask. But anyways, they return back to the roost to see that the eggs are perfectly fine in the care of Cutter, Burple, and Aggro. But we humorously have to end the episode with Burple accidentally spilling the whole truth of what happened with the eggs, which of course Burple has to mess things up. So I will say, despite this episode being a parody to Home Alone, I will unfortunately say that this might be the weakest episode of the season just because it does not stand out at all to me, and I rarely see any acknowledgement of it to where it pretty much implies that this episode wasn't really that strong compared to the other episodes in season 1, so there you have it. Episode 10, Slobber Power, and it starts off with the team just impatiently waiting for the eggs to hatch because I guess we needed this segment to drag out the episode a bit. But while they wait, Cutter has this sharpener that he uses to sharpen his spike tail, which has a very annoying sound effect. Next, we have Dak, Winger, Aggro, and Burple heading down to town, and they spot Elbow trying to craft another business. This time, he wants to be a florist, but in his words, he calls it flowerist. Continuing the ditzy nature he exudes, he does tell them that he plans to collect materials from Fornthane Valley, which has very hazardous conditions, but I guess Elbow didn't do his research or prepped himself. He embarks on the adventure solo, but the Rescue Riders decide to secretly follow him. Back at the roost, Layla, Cutter, and Summer witness the middle egg hatch, and a baby dragon is identified as a slobber smelter. And since the word slobber is in the title of this episode, we'll see what significance it has on the plot. One unique thing about these baby dragons is that it drools a lot of acidic saliva. Back to the main point, Cutter blatantly doesn't want to take responsibility of these dragons, but because of some unfortunate circumstances, it is now his duty to keep them in his care. And we do get funny segments of Cutter trying to play activities with the baby dragon, but he unfortunately fizzles, and the final straw is when the baby dragon chews on his sharpener, effectively ruining it. And now Cutter decides to let the baby dragon take a nap in hopes that he won't have to deal with it anymore. We now cut to a scene in Fornthane Valley where Elbow is traversing through a bunch of tangly vines, unaware that the Rescue Riders are following him, but he does find out eventually. But Elbow spots a beautiful flower located on a stone wall overwhelmed with vines. Elbow doesn't think much of it and goes to collect the flower just as tangly vines wrap him up. The Rescue Riders try to free him, but Dak, Winger, Aggro, and Burple all get tangled up as well. They are all stuck and Winger tries to power blast them out, but it ricochets, so that's not a good idea. But because Aggro is tiny, she's able to squeeze herself out of the vines and is urged to fetch Cutter for help. Back at the roost, we see Cutter mourning over his damaged sharpener, being like, "This is why we can't have nice things." Just then, he's startled by Aggro barging open the door, but she does explain the situation to Cutter, and he's willing to go, but he's forced to bring the baby dragon along with him. And the two do struggle to find him, but they eventually discover the baby dragon inside a barrel of fish. So now all three of them head off to save their friends. We return back with Dak, Winger, and Elbow and Burple and see the vines really start tightening up on them more. But Cutter, Aggro, and the baby dragon arrive, and so the former tries to use his spike tail to slash the vines, but they are really sustainable against his blade. Then one of the vines tried to grab the baby dragon, but Aggro saves him just as she is grabbed and tangled up again. After a moment of thinking, Cutter recognizes that the baby dragon's acidic saliva could help melt away the vines, in which he gets Burple to spew out a fish for him so he could lead the baby dragon around the tangling vine while it drools its acidic saliva onto the vines, melting them away and one by one seeing everybody freed from the tangly vines. They all return back home, and we see Cutter playing around with the baby dragon, who he now decided to name Sizzle. And just then, the other two eggs hatch, giving Sizzle some siblings to join his fun with Cutter, and the episode concludes like that. I will say this is another very remarkable episode, but I felt like the mid portion of the episode was the more intriguing segments because of how much adversity the Rescue Riders were facing, and so it was really fun to watch it play out. Now we jump into episode 11, Crash Course. And it begins with Burple lamenting on how slow of a dragon he is and admires Winger because he is the fastest dragon and wishes he was like him. Anyways, a storm occurs and everyone is forced to head indoors. We do have a nice chat between Winger and Burple where Winger explains that dragons simply can't learn to be like each other since they're all built to function differently, which Burple understands to his dismay. Suddenly, the storm wind blows open the rooster's window, and the strength of the breeze knocks over many of Layla's items, to which everyone thankfully saves. But now Layla decides to move all her items into the sleep cave to keep them all safe, which I'm sure nothing will go wrong. I mean, with now the baby dragons roaming around in the sleep cave, it should be alarming to Layla that she may not have secured enough safety for her items. But she didn't think much of it. So everyone goes to sleep, and the baby dragons of course roamed around the sleep cave, in which they knock over a jar of Slinkwing slime, and you would think they would be the cause of it breaking, but no, it rolls over towards Cutter's direction, and by Cutter's own faux pas, his own tail knocks over the jar and spills all the slime beneath him. And he does find out the next morning that he is stuck. So Layla, Summer, and Agro stay to help him out. We have Dak ready to ride on Winger so they can enjoy some joy flying with Winger's cool flying skills. Burple is so captivated by Winger's incredible flying that he follows where Winger and Dak are going. But they do notice Burple following them and trying to imitate Winger's moves, so they decide to show off more of Winger's amazing flying tricks to amaze him, in which Burple tries to attempt to match Winger's moves, and he's pretty fair at it, being on par with Winger's feedback on it. So he decides to present Burple another flying trick, and he titles it the Swiftwing Spin Spiral, in which he flies to the peak of the clouds, then descends down in a spiraling position. Burple attempts to copy the trick, but he loses control and crash lands onto another island. Back with Cutter's situation, Layla, Agro, and Summer are unable to free him, so they decide to cater him some food, and it feels like they were treating him like he was sick in this instance, but for this case, he's glued to the floor. Back at the other island, Dak and Winger witness Burple crash landing there, so they attempt to find him. Burple is chased by some wolves, and he attempts to fly, but his right wing is unable to function because it was wounded by the crash landing he suffered earlier. Just as wolves corner Burple, Winger flies in and power blasts the wolves away. They see that Burple's crash took a toll on his right wings, and Dak finds vines that they could use as a tow line. We return back with Cutter, and while he's fed fish, he makes sure to finish them all, in which one fish is located far from his range, so he attempts to reach for it, and with much tension, he's able to free himself from the slime. But seeing how much catering he was getting, he decides to pretend to still be stuck, continuing on his trickster nature. Which I'm also surprised Layla, Summer, and Agro didn't hear Cutter free himself when they're literally right at the front entrance. So that was pretty ridiculous. Next, we see Winger towing Burple out of the island. But at mid-flight, the tow line vine breaks, forcing Winger to save him and now carry Burple, which was too much weight for him, causing everyone to crash land onto a sea stack. But now there is more trouble because Winger's left wing is injured as well, which now grounded him too. And to add on top of that, they are surrounded by eels, in which dragons are obviously afraid of. After some time, Dak recognizes the convenience there that he could use as opportunity to help everyone out of the situation. First, Winger's right wing is functioning while Burple's left wing is, and with the leftover vines, the convenience is there to strap the dragons together so they could fly simultaneously. In this case, requires a lot of teamwork. Back at the roost, Cutter still continues to trick the girls to believing he's stuck, only for them to spy through the crack of the door to discover that he had deceived them. So now they have a plan to end his little trick game. Back with Dak, Winger, Burple, They make their first flying attempt, but fail miserably. And this is the case of combining the speed of a rock spitter and a swiftwing, which is completely unbalanced since one of them go faster while the other is slower. But then we do have another nice chat between Burple and Winger, and this time, Burple decides to educate him on learning to have a slower speed so it could help balance the steadiness of them flying. So Winger follows through with Burple's tip, and the flying is way more smoother and they're able to escape from the eels. And we have a nice visual of Dak flying on 2 dragons at once, which they do have a friendly discussion on how they all can learn new things. But we return back to the roost, and the girls devised a perfect plan for Cutter's situation. They brought in the baby slobber smelters to remind you they have acidic saliva. And once they charge towards Cutter, he's terrified and dashes off the slime, revealing that he was truly faking his situation. He does apologize and confess his actions, and for some good comeuppance, they ask him to cater what they want, which is a lot of work for him to do. But we end the episode with Dak, Winger, and Burple presenting everyone their new flying technique of having Dak fly both of them at once, and the scene closes off like that. It's a pretty decent episode. I like how much it focused on the Burple and Winger relationship, as both of their speeds really contrast each other. This is one of the few times where I actually do feel sympathy for Burple, and it's nice that he admires Winger because he is the superior and most valuable dragon on the team, and it was cool to see teamwork enforced at the end. Now we jump into the 12th episode, which is called Furious Fun. And we begin with the team just fixing a roof. Then next, they come to rescue Finked, who climbed up a tree. After that, they head back to the roost, and on their way, Aggro spots some fire spark. She heads over to check it out and discovers 2 fellow fire furies who are much older than her. And their names are Labern and Cinda. And their endless fun characterizes the joyful nature they have. Now we have a trio of fire furies, and Aggro decides to invite them over to the roost for some fish dinner. During dinner time, Fink's mom hands over a book to the team, and we now learn that Finked purposely puts himself in these dangerous spots so he could write notes about his rescues from the team. And for that, the team decides to bring Finked along on a dragon day, and his mother delightfully accepts. Next, we have Aggro introducing her fellow Fire Fury friends Cinda and Labern to the team. And so they decide to have a nice joy flying around the woods, and culminated with the Fire Furies blasting all their fires at once, creating a beautiful firework effect. Everyone is exhausted and decide to go to sleep, but the Fire Furies decide to stay up, causing a lot of disturbance for everyone that night. The next morning, the yard is basically a mess, and the roost's zip line is detached, but the Fire Furies take responsibility and clean up the mess they made. And then they decide to fly off to other places like the snowy region to have some fun. Back at the roost, the team follows up with their promise to hold a dragon day for Finked, so which they have the dragons show off their cool tricks to him, giving him more notes to add to his book. He only is missing a Fire Fury to make any notes on, which obviously is Aggro, and she's not present because she's hanging out with Cinda and Labern. Next, we have the Fire Furies fly over to a valley that is full of geysers. Aggro urges them to not continue, but their nature of fun makes them stubborn to recognize the dangers they're in. Then, Finked unexpectedly appears and enters the geyser zone, not aware of the danger he just put himself in. Aggro is able to save him and bring him to safety just before she descends into sticky mud in which she's stuck in. Then Cinda and Labber stupidly follow her footsteps, and now they're stuck too. So they now need help and decide to use their fire blasts combined so they could signal the rescue riders. We're cut back to them trying to search for Aggro at the roost, but they do see the Fire Fury's fire blast signal, so they head over there. And we return back to the valley and see more geysers erupting, just as the rescue riders arrive to clog some of them up. With one of the cloggers being literally a tree, but it was not strong enough to hold against the erupting geysers, so it's blasted into the air and almost lands on the Fire Fury. Just then, Winger power blasts it to save them. And then we have Summer spewing her water at the mud pit, freeing all the Fire Furies just in time before the mud pit erupts its geyser. Meanwhile, all this happening, Finked is witness to it, which allows him to take notes on Fire Furies now. Cinda and Labern decide to move on to their next adventure, and this time Aggro decides to stay back with her team, which the two Fire Furies accept her decision and hopes to see the team again sometime down the road. Everyone returns back to the roost, where we have Aggro show off another cool trick of hers, of fire blasting onto a rock that prints an image of Finguard's face. And that's the ending. Alright, this is another very weak episode for me. I didn't find this very remarkable because it had some slow points along the way. But it was cool for this episode to start introducing us some recurring dragon characters, beginning with Cinna and Labyrinth, and we'll get more later down the road. Now let's jump into episode 13, Grumbleguard Part 1, because it is a two-part episode, and this is also a Winger-centric episode, which finally is something I've always wanted to see. But it starts out with Dak and Winger doing some joy flying, and Winger doing some nice flying tricks, while Burple attempts to imitate it, reminiscent to the events that happened in Crash Course. Then they rescue a bunch of baby dragons who are chased by wolves, because obviously when the rescue riders are present, there are baby dragons needing to be rescued because their parents are incapable of looking after them and instead neglecting their babies. But Dak, Winger, and Burple take the babies back to the roost, and we see the rest of the teams have their hands full with the other baby dragons they rescued in the previous episodes, and the ones that were just saved become new additions to that count. Layla does identify the new baby dragons as piercing shriek scales because they have a high vocal shriek that is so annoying. And now they're crying for food, which they can't eat fish, and Layla discovers that these guys only eat the birch of a crimson pine tree, which is very rare, and they try to find it in Huttsgalor, but they are all chopped down, which that certainly isn't convenient. So next, they're at the roost looking at a map of islands, and Duggard's there as well, and he hesitantly acknowledges that the big island, known as Hazard Island, could contain some crimson pine trees there. Dak is up for it, but Duggard warns him about the dangers of the island considering how obscure it is. But next, we have Dak, Winger, Burple, and Aggro heading off to find some crimson pine tree birch, and Dak, being Dak, still decides he wants to go to Hazard Island, ignoring all of Duggard's warnings. And as they're flying, they see Hazard Island up ahead, and when they get closer, they spot the crimson pine trees at the top of the island, which is also surrounding a cave there, so that should alarm them that somebody is residing there, but of course they didn't think of that. And once they head into the atmosphere of the island, they are encountered by some strong wind that is really breezy, and it blows them away onto a sea stack, which this should probably alert them that Hazard Island is a forbidden territory, but they still continue to ignore that fact. Anyways, we get a segment at the roost where it shows Layla, Summer, and Cutter struggling to take care of all 6 dragon babies, and they're pretty much drained out at this point. Back with Hazard Island, the team is determined to get the tree birches, so they just have to endure the strong wind that's trying to blow them away. Aggro unfortunately succumbs to it. Meanwhile, Burple uses himself as a shield in front of Winger before he's blown away, thus allowing Winger and Dak to reach the surface of Hazard Island. Now Dak goes to try and collect some crimson pine birches, and Winger is really sketched out by the physics of the wind, so he encourages Dak to make it quick, but Dak tries to reassure him when they're standing right in front of a cave, and of course, out comes the dragon that lives there, and his name is Grumbleguard, and he's a dragon that came off very arrogant and demeaning at first, but later on down the road, he would eventually become more of a pleasant character. But right at this moment, Grumbleguard is upset that Dak and Winger has trespassed into his boundaries, so he tries to kick them out. But the two, along with Aggro and Burple, which I'm surprised they got through the strong winds, try to attack him, but he's able to deflect all of their shots, and with much great force, his wings blow everyone away. They all land back at the sea stack, and they now discuss a plan to counteract Grumbleguard. And then we have Dak suggesting that Winger should try his Mega Blast, but Winger says that he can't do it, and he admits that he always goes out at night without anyone's knowledge and attempts to Mega Blast, but it doesn't work out for him. And he demonstrates it in this moment to show everyone. And I do feel a lot of pity for Winger here, where he has the assumption that he can't do a Mega Blast because he either hasn't aged enough or he just didn't develop the special power like his mother has. Which I should mention, it's nice that Winger's mother gets acknowledged here again, considering, spoiler alert, she never makes an appearance at all throughout this series. But Dak goes to comfort him and says that Winger is still strong enough even without a Mega Blast. But now back to business. Dak concepts a plan that can help counteract Grumbleguard, which in this case, they go to battle him again, and it ends with Grumbleguard blowing Dak off of Winger's back, and as he falls, Burple apparently saves them and retreats with the other dragons, but it turns out Dak hid inside a tree so he could remain on the island to collect the Crimson Pine Birch. Back at the roost, Layla, Summer, and Cutter are just exhausted dealing with these baby dragons, and then out of nowhere, Marina chimes in and does this stylish dance that puts the baby dragons to sleep. But once she leaves, nap time didn't last long. Back with the island, Dak has collected enough Crimson Pine Birch, which he puts in a sack. But unfortunately, he's caught by Grumbleguard, who tries to blow him away, and Dak is able to grip onto a branch, with the dragons witnessing everything. Aggro and Burple try to encourage Winger to finally do a Mega Blast, but he says he still can't do it. And reminding the conversation he had with Dak earlier, he has an idea that doesn't require a Mega Blast. It involves Aggro and Burple distracting Grumbleguard, to which they're both blown away, just as Winger flies in and power blasts at the ceiling rocks above Grumbleguard, and due to the effects, the rocks become unstable and collapse onto Grumbleguard. Winger goes to grab Dak, and they have one final conversation with Grumbleguard where he looks at them as new enemies they've made themselves. He's just so ignorant that he doesn't understand the full context, that Dak was there simply to collect Burke to feed baby dragons, to which he mentions it to Grumbleguard, but I guess he didn't recognize that because he was just too full of himself in that moment. Anyway, Dak, Winger, Burple, and Aggro return with the Burke of Crimson Pines, and they feed it to the baby shriek scales and they munch on it. Then we see that Grumbleguard followed them to Huttsgalor, and the episode ends on a cliffhanger. I like that this is a two-parter because it does give us a lot of thrill and suspense with what's going to come next. But for this episode, it's pretty strong. I really like that it's obviously a Winger-centric episode, so it was finally nice to give him the spotlight. And especially the moment Winger couldn't compare himself as powerful as his mother because he couldn't do a Mega Blast, and then we obviously have Dak consoling him, and which was a nice touching moment between the two, showcasing the strong connection Dak and Winger had. And obviously this is just part 1, so we've got more to build off of from this story, which is great. Now we go into episode 14, called Grumbleguard Part 2. Continuing off what happened at the end of last episode, and having the plot center around Winger once again, which I'm enthralled by. Anyways, we begin the episode with Grumbleguard approaching the town with the intentions of causing havoc to it as payback for the rescue riders invading his island. Dak, Winger, and Cutter try to reason with him, but to no avail, and Grumbleguard blows them away, and then he starts causing damage around Huttsgalor by blowing strong wind at it. It is at this point that a Mega Blast from Winger is really needed. Even though he has no ability to do it, he wants to make the attempt to try and save the town. Once Winger attempted to do a blast, it goes all wrong and it recoils him and Dak. And I can resonate with Winger because in this situation, he's under a lot of pressure trying to do a Mega Blast, something that he's not able to do, but it's something that is needed to end all the chaos. But unfortunately, the pressure got to him and he was unsuccessful in making a Mega Blast. But anyways, Grumbleguard now makes a demand to the rescue riders to leave the island, or else if they remain there, he's going to raise the tide with his strong wind, and it will cause a flood to Huttsgalor, which is obviously not ideal. And their deadline is the next day before he makes one final blow, and we cut to the next segment of the rescue riders and everyone tidying up the damage that was left around town because of Grumbleguard. And to make matters more worse, Magnus, who obviously has a big distaste to dragons, weaponizes the situation between the rescue riders and Grumbleguard as a way to create a rebellion against the team, which was pretty frustrating to see some of the village people actually take Magnus' side because of his rebellious nature. But thankfully, Duggar, Hanar, and Alpo are completely siding with the rescue riders no matter the circumstances. But anyways, we have the team trying to figure out a solution, and when Burple mentions the Slinkwing in this conversation, that comes up with an idea of working with the Slinkwings to take down Grumbleguard, which in my opinion, is completely asinine. They have a complete hostile relationship with them, so there can be a chance that the Slinkwings have a lot of vengeance in their minds because of their vendetta against the Rescue Riders. So I believe this choice is completely stupid, and I don't think Dak assessed the scenarios the right way. But anyways, they do decide to try and work with the Slinkwings to stop Grumbleguard, which surprisingly they do accept, despite how cagey they were and how condescending they sounded. This should have been red flags to the Rescue Riders, but they don't see it that way. Anyways, the team is back at the roost as a way to bait Grumbleguard to come after them. Once he arrives at the roost, he falls into the Rescue Riders' traps with the Slinkwings shooting Slinkwing goo at him, covering his wings, body, and mouth, making him muffled when he speaks. Everyone is happy that they defeated Grumbleguard, and we hope that it is over, just to find out that the Slinkwings were double-crossing them, encapsulating the stupid decision Dak made to work with them. And now the Slinkwings are taking ownership of Hazard Island, Grumbleguard's home, which is a very Slinkwing thing to do. Well, since Grumbleguard is stuck with the Rescue Riders, they take this chance to finally have a nice chat with them to smooth things out. Summer water blasts the goo off his mouth, and he starts the conversation by reprimanding them for even trusting Slinkwings, which he's right on that. Just then, the baby dragons barge out of the sleep cave and swarm around Grumbleguard because I guess they like his presence, with him humorously revealing that he is 275 years old, which does ring Layla's bell that he is a forever horned dragon. Anyways, Grumbleguard begins to finally understand why the team invaded his island and apologized for his ignorance that would lead him to attack Huttsgalor, which I will say it is a lot on Grumbleguard's end because he was really showing a lot of self-righteous and ignorant behavior instead of trying to understand the situation from the team's perspective when they were there to just collect crimson pine barks to feed baby dragons. And if it wasn't for him being so inept with his listening skills, all of the chaotic events that just occurred would have never taken place. But now the team has befriended Grumbleguard, and they're all working together to battle the Slinkwings. And we see when they're approaching Hazard Island, they spot that the Slinkwings have resided into Grumbleguard's cave, which they have sealed it up with rocks and Slinkwing goo. And so the Slinkwings spot the team approaching, and a battle ensues. And we see many of the team members in Layla, Cutter, Agro, Burple, and Dak getting all gooed by the Slinkwings. And to make matters worse, the Slinkwings did a really good job concealing the cave since it pretty much shields off every attack the dragons try to do. So now the only hopes left is Winger and Grumbleguard, which Grumbleguard tries to suggest Winger to finally do a Mega Blast, but he claims that he still can't do it. So then Grumbleguard recommends that he takes a munch out of some special wood that he claims is going to make Winger more powerful. So Winger takes a bite out of it and flies into the air to prepare to finally do a Mega Blast. We see him charge toward the concealed cave, lining up his shot and successfully firing a Mega Blast, and its effect obliterates the concealed rocks the Slinkwings made. Now that they're exposed, Grumbleguard contributes his part and blows all the Slinkwings away. And this culminates this very dramatic battle. The Rescue Riders thank Grumbleguard for his help, and just as they're about to leave, he does inform Winger that the wood was just an exaggeration, and that Winger's confidence is what factored into him finally making a Mega Blast. And in essence, he's absolutely correct. Since the amount of times Winger has failed to do a Mega Blast, we see that he was making the attempts under complete pressure or in low confidence. But this was a really nice moment that encapsulates Winger's development of his confidence. The team returns back to the roost and are ready to deal with the orphan dragons once again. But we see Grumbleguard has returned back and shows some kindness by adopting the baby dragons, since we saw earlier that they really loved him. And plus, Hazard Island has more space than the roost. The episode ends off with Grumbleguard adopting the baby dragons and flying off with them into the distance. And that concludes episode 14, aka the finale of season 1. This was an extremely strong episode, and it really helped develop Winger's character as well as Grumbleguard's, because obviously in the previous episode, He's very antagonistic and unlikable, but he really changed that in this episode, showing a lot of pleasure and care, and now he's become more of an asset to the Rescue Riders. And the whole narrative of this episode is a really great send-off to the first ever season of Rescue Riders, which in my opinion was a very enjoyable season. There are some ups and downs, but I do feel like this episode was the pinnacle of this series. And now that season 1 is complete, we move on to the second season. Now we're jumping into the second season of Rescue Riders, which is pretty by the numbers. I will say, I had a lot of excitement coming into the season, but now in retrospective, it's kind of a season that doesn't really stick to my mind as time goes on. It doesn't really have the most memorable episodes or anything that truly expedite the series. But despite those things, there are some minor points to prop this season up. This season introduces us to more interesting characters, which is an aspect that I like. And it also gives some spotlight to some reoccurring characters who we might have not met in the first season or did not get much to do, which I like that aspect of expanding beyond the margin. So I will give some merit to what this season gave us, but it doesn't change the fact that it really doesn't have a lot of remarkable aspects or anything that stands out to truly make this season more elite than the first one. But either way, I'll still be running through with it, so let's begin with the first episode called Double Finked. And it starts off with the team testing out their new vine tricks, which we do see Dax struggle with, which his problems drag Winger into it as well. So Winger suggests they just go back to the roost and eat, but he makes it so blatant that his motive is just to protect Dax, which he's easily able to figure out, and that was kind of humorous. But then we cut to Huttsgalor, and we see stuff being unloaded on a ship, as well as a stowaway there whose name is Axel, and he asks Duggar on Magnus's whereabouts because it turns out he's the nephew of Magnus Finked. And as you all know, Magnus sucks, and I dislike him. So it felt like this show wanted to add a boost to the rebellion Magnus is trying to make by using a relative of his, which in this case, Axel. And I'm kind of perplexed that Axel even looks at Magnus as a role model, considering the amount of excessive fails he's done with his inventions. But to be fair, Axel wasn't present there at those times, so he doesn't really have enough knowledge of the events that occurred. So with that, I believe he just admires his uncle for his so-called successes with his inventions. Yeah, right. Anyways, he heads off to search for his uncle's home. Just as we return back to the roost, we see that one of the crates have been delivered to the rescuers, and they open up to reveal that it is a large purplish dragon egg, which a baby dragon is obviously going to hatch from it. So in honor of the previous episode, the team should be thankful that Grumbleguard decided to adopt the orphan dragons, because the team would have probably been completely drained out taking care of 7 baby dragons. So in honor of what happened in the previous episode has worked out in their favor. Anyways, we have a segment at Magnus's home, which is the first time we actually get to see it, and the house design looks very tacky. But anyways, Axel meets up with his uncle, and he humorously doesn't even recognize him until Axel has to reintroduce himself as his nephew, which is kind of fair since Magnus has stated that he hasn't even seen Axel since he was an infant. So it's pretty understandable that he wouldn't be familiar with his distant relative. But since he is related to Magnus, the man has no choice but to be taking care of Axel in the meantime, which he's completely conflicted with. But obviously his first thing to share with Axel is to help him get rid of the rescuers. And so Axel has a plan to deal with them. And when we cut to the roost, we see him approach the team and asks to join them without any context of his background, which they surprisingly let him in. And obviously with the new dragon egg that was just delivered to the team, I think we all know what Axel is going to try and do next. Night comes and the team needs some volunteers to guard the egg while it's outside. And both Cutter and Axel elect to watch over it. And it's really dumb for the team to even let Axel be one of the egg watchers, considering he just joined the team and they don't know much about him. But I will say, it is also kind of thingless to let Cutter be a guard as well, considering the context of episodes like Bad Egg and Home Alone, which showcases Cutter's inability to properly guard an egg, which led to some dangerous adventures the team had to go on because of his own flaws. And just like what I said, Cutter is extremely incompetent and falls asleep, thus allowing Axel to take the egg and hand it to his uncle, in which he does so successfully. Anyways, it's the next morning, and the team discovers that the egg has vanished, to which everyone assumes that it might have been the Slinkwings, so they take off to find them. Meanwhile, Axel stays behind so he can meet up with his uncle again to show him the dragon egg he stole. Which this isn't something that Magnus was asking for, especially since he has an anti-dragon persona, so I don't think Axel had any proper brain cells in this situation. But anyways, the egg finally hatches and emerges a baby dragon known as a Ramblefang. And the baby dragon decides to play around with Axel because I guess he likes him and treats him like he's some plushie. But anyways, we return with the rescue riders who are searching in the forest and they spot Duggar on the ground, so they decide to interact with him. And during their conversation, Duggar does imply Axel being related to Magnus, which the rescue riders finally learn that Axel was Magnus's nephew and he was just playing them. So they figured that he was the one that stole the egg, so they head over to Magnus's house. And once they arrive, they discover that the egg has hatched and the baby dragon is classified as the roaming Ramblefang. Which, giving some context from Heroes of the Sky, spoiler alert, they've actually dealt with Ramblefang before, even befriending it, and it does resemble the baby dragon that just hatched. But the baby dragon wants to protect Axel from the rescue rider, so he takes him and flies away to a sea stack. And they're continuing to play around with Axel, which you can see how much torture he's feeling, being played around like he's some toy. But obviously when the baby dragon was flying away, the rescue riders were on pursuit for him. And once they spot it, they decide to use the vine trick they did earlier to rescue Axel. Dak attempts to do it, but it continues to be unsuccessful. So this time Layla does so, and with the help of the team distracting the baby dragon, she successfully rescues Axel seconds before the baby dragon spots them. He's obviously livid to lose his toy, but obviously because they're the rescue riders, they're going to be nice enough to hand him a replacement toy, which is an actual elbow doll. So that keeps the baby dragon happy. Anyways, the team drops Axel back at Magnus's home, and Axel has to be so delusional to think that he's gonna join the rescue riders after what just happened. And it's not like he was gonna be able to take care of that baby Ramblefang anyways, and the rescue riders have a better idea on who will take care of the baby dragon, which obviously is Grumbleguard. After that, Axel thinks Magnus wouldn't want him anymore, but he is wrong, and Magnus actually decides to accept looking after Axel under the condition that he'll help him get rid of the rescue riders soon. And just for some comedy, we're gonna have the episode end with Magnus's new invention finally working, only for it to humorously fire a block of hay at him. So that concludes the first episode of Season 2, which was a pretty basic episode, introducing us to a new recurring character in Axel, whose characteristics are on par with his uncle. But sadly, this episode didn't really do much to stand out. But I do think there are some minor good parts to this episode, so there you go. Anyways, let's begin with episode 2 of Season 2, Divewings. And it begins with the team gathering supplies in the town, with Burple rolling some pumpkins and Cutter surprisingly eating all the apples. We also humorously have Elbone falling into the water with his Rocky. Winger stays Elbone because he's on the surface of the water, while Summer swims deep into the ocean to retrieve Rocky. Anyways, we have Magnus and Axel appear with a load of scrapped metal. Some of the pieces fall off onto the ground, and Magnus has no care to picking them up to show any respect to the environment, which is a very Magnus thing to do. Which I shall say, this episode does center around a lot of issues with irresponsibility with garbage and littering. Anyways, Magnus and Axel are persuaded to pick the pieces up, and the rescuers are just about to head off to the roost, only for Cutter to spot a Huttsgalorian boat being attacked by some dragons who have a similar water power like Summer's. So the team goes to investigate. The team helps restore the balance for the ship, just as Layla and Summer dive into the ocean to confront these kind of dragons. But they are immediately hostile towards them, and once they exit out of the water, they are really not fond of humans, especially when they see Layla riding on Summer's back, so these dragons spray water at them, which that was totally unnecessary. So next, these dragons try to fly away, but the rescue riders follow them only to lose sight of them, which Layla does confirm that she knows these dragon species are Divewings, who are aquatic dragons, so that explains their power to squirt water just like Summer. But after a brief search, they spot a whirlpool on the ocean's surface, but are uncertain to go into it. But fast fins like Summer have no issue diving into it, while Layla has confidence she can hold her breath long enough. So they enter through the whirlpool, and they do endure the whole element of a whirlpool that spins them around like a tornado, kind of like a transition before they reach their destination, which is the Divewings cave. But obviously, this constitutes trespassing, and Divewings are pretty furious with their presence there. So they immediately jet just before Dak and Winger are about to follow their footsteps. But now that Layla and Summer has seen what's beyond the whirlpool, the team all dive into the whirlpool together and endure the spiraling current just before they transition into the Divewing cave. Once they're all there, they've observed how messy the cave has been, being overloaded with a lot of litter and garbage, which is completely polluting its atmosphere. And this perpetuates the anger from the Divewings, who by the way revealed their names to be Gil and Fathom, who explained their reasonings to attacking the ship simply because they have the assumption that the Huttsgalorians are littering garbage into the ocean and polluting the aquatic life, thus endangering the Divewings' baby eggs. Which the situation does corroborate their vendetta towards humans, which is why they are kind of hostile towards Dak and Layla. But the rescue riders are a team willing to help, so they offer to assist on tidying up the cave. Fathom is a little iffy on it, but Gil already approves them, and he's able to persuade Fathom to agree, but to make some optimal decisions. Dak elects to return back to the surface to investigate on who's the culprit of littering into the sea, which we have a little switcheroo here with him riding Summer this time, since she is a water dragon, so I like this aspect of adding a different dynamic between the team members. So Dak, Summer, Aggro, and Cutter return back in the air to search for the culprit. And their main suspect is Magnus, because obviously Magnus would be capable of doing something like this. So they confront him, and he's claiming he didn't do it, which could be a lie, but it turns out he was being honest. But I will fault him for even allowing himself to be the one accused, simply because of what happened earlier when he was so careless of leaving his trash behind just to be talked into picking them back up. So it is of his own actions that makes people look at him as a suspect in these situations. But anyways, back at the cave, we have Layla, Winger, and Burple cleaning up the trash and giving the cave a more tidy environment. And we do have a moment with Fathom, who's clearly the most hostile of the two against humans. And it starts to hit her that humans aren't really as bad as she was assuming. And with the rescue riders helping them out, it does set a good precedent to the Divewings that humans are really respectful and kind. But after this friendly chat, the Divewings offer to bring the remainder of the team to the surface, and now Layla will be riding Winger as in honor of the switcheroo aspect. And she and Winger had this little funny conversation of Winger thinking that she'll just be fine and not be so crazy about it, but Layla responds with "you'll never know," with his expression completely dropping. But anyways, the rest of them resurface and reunite with the others, and Dak states everything seems to be fine after his side was monitoring the accused in Magnus and Axel. But then suddenly, a multitude of litter is approaching the whirlpool. So Dak and Summer follow the alignment of the litter to the culprit who's generating this mess. And it turns out that culprit was Elbone, which turns out it was part of his business of trash collecting, which the first half he's right to do in making sure the trash is all eliminated in Huttsgalor. But for the second part, he had the wrong notion on handling the collected garbage, not recognizing that he would be polluting the sea in the process. And the situation doesn't help when the Divewings tried to retaliate against Elbone, not realizing it was a misunderstanding, only to make matters worse and cause the remainder of his trash to land into the ocean. Just as the situation looks dire for the Divewings, Ebel decides to have some redemption here by using some fishing nets and having him and Dak collect the trash that is headed towards the whirlpool. And so they do that, and they're able to collect all the trash from the ocean. Anyways, they reach back to shore, and Elba and the team apologize to the Divewings on what happened, which they do forgive, and Fathom finally comes around to accepting that humans are good. The team decides to pass on the remaining trash to Hanar so she can make good use of it, which is really nice. And then we have one final bizarre scene, which is when Dak and Summer arrive at Magnus' home with Dak giving Magnus an apology for falsely accusing him of causing the sea pollution. Which I should say that this should have been a way for Magnus to realize that the rescue riders are still respectful to him despite the bevy of issues he's caused for them. But we're talking about Magnus here, who clearly never changes. And of course, he's not really receptive to Dak's apology and slams the door just as it falls down, which is good karma for him. But anyways, once Dak and Summer leave, Magnus showcases to Axel on a covered invention that he plans to reveal soon, which does set up the events of the next episode. And that's the end of this episode. It's a fine episode, and it does actually give a little bit of an educational aspect to this, as it does introduce the issues that happens in real life with garbage pollution and showcase the environment for those who endure with this issue, which was really driving the educational characteristic of this episode. And besides that, it was really only a fine episode, not too much to say here. Now we jump into episode 3 of season 2 called Mecha-Menace. And the episode starts off with a gathering in Huttsgalor, because Haggis is ready to exit his tent to discover his shadow, declaring that it's spring. And to celebrate, the town's gonna have a spring festival. So the town gets to work setting up the festival, while the rescue riders have their contribution in decorating some luck lanterns. And so while they're painting, Axel and Magnus sneak up to try and do some measurements on the dragon's tail just to be caught by Dak and Winger. So they excuse themselves by requesting a luck lantern for Axel, in which they do give him one. And once we have a segment at Magnus' house, we get follow-up to the invention that Magnus was teasing last episode, and we see him finishing the last portions of it before instructing Axel to operate it. Back in town, we see everyone decorating the town for the festival, and we have Elbone, who's wheeling some bags of seeds because he's going to be a farmer. The team offers to help him out, but he refuses. Next, we have the team asking Duggar for any assistance, in which he does initially assign them some tasks, only for Magnus and Axel to arrive, presenting their new invention to the town. And his invention is called the Mechano-Dragon, which is his kind of motivation to make this as a competition against the rescuers on which dragon is more useful. And in this case, his is actually functioning cohesively and contributing a lot to organizing the festival, which the townspeople are impressed by. But then we have Elbone approaching Layla, asking her team to help him with the farming, in which her, Summer, and Cutter come over to help plant the seeds in the soil. But back in the town, there's an announcement for who has earned the Spring Festival crown, which unfortunately to the rescue riders, Magnus has won. And so he goes up on the stage to have Duggar put the crown on his head, but he's too tall, which is like, Magnus, lean over if you want to make Duggar's job easier. But instead, he just snatches the crown out of his hands and puts it on himself. Everyone is cheering while the rescuers are completely in disbelief, and do figure that Magnus' intention is to replace them with his Mechano-Dragon as a way to eliminate them because of his anti-dragon bias. And of course, Magnus has to continue that notion when he catches Layla and Summer growing more seed bags to help with Elbone's farming, so he intervenes and wants to take over the job as well. So Axel operates the Mechano-Dragon and takes one of the seed bags, but Layla is not going to give them any satisfaction and wants her and Summer to compete against that mechanic dragon. So Summer grabs a seed bag as well, and we see the two opposing sides competing against each other on who's faster to fill all the rows of dirt with seeds. And everyone comes in to spectate. Just then, Axel pushes way too hard and the Mechano-Dragon begins to slowly break apart. And now it begins to malfunction and fly hazardly with Axel on it. Now the rescue riders are on pursuit with the mechanic dragon, just as it causes more problems around the town and endangering all the villagers there. Layla and Summer directly chase after the machine while everyone else protects the town. The machine continues to spiral around town and almost collides with the luck lanterns, but Winger bumps into it and saves the lantern, but in the process rendering him weak at the moment. So now, Cutter and Burple follow along Layla and Summer to pursue the machine. Axel continues to lose his balance and eventually is now hanging onto the leg of the Mechano-Dragon. But the team is able to do some teamwork and is able to save Axel just before the machine collides into a sea sack, even though it doesn't, and it just darts away and isn't seen for a while. They return back to the town where they confiscate the Spring Festival crown from Magnus and hand it to Layla instead, which they should have done to begin with. Anyways, Magnus is so incredulous on what happened, just as his own Mechano-Dragon comes back and rams into the luck lanterns, causing him and Axel to flee. With the luck lanterns destroyed, the festival's night is not going to be as entertaining, but because the rescue riders are there with dragons, they can make good use of themselves, and all together, they fire their powers up in the air to create a firework effect, like a fireworks show, and everyone is amazed. And this is something that Magnus' Mechano-Dragon clearly couldn't have done, so this was satisfying. That's the ending of this episode. Okay, this is another fine episode, not too much of note. It is pretty compelling with the aspect of Magnus' Mechano-Dragon being very conducive and in a way to try and replace the rescue riders. But because it's a kid show, the antagonist wasn't gonna get satisfaction and would have his downfall soon, in which he did, and gives more merit to this episode. Alright, now we jump into episode 4 of season 2 called Summer Holiday. And it begins with the team carrying a giant nest of eggs to the top of a mountain, and it gets even heavier when Cutter has the idiocy to sleep in it. But anyways, once the team reaches to the top of the mountain, Finked out of nowhere is present there and wants to help out, but instead, he falls into the nest and causes it to slide down with the eggs flying in the air, but the team is able to save them, as well as saving Finked just as the nest falls off a cliff, which Burple is able to catch. Then it is really humorous to see that the team could have just approached a more easier tack to maneuver both the nest and the eggs to the top of the mountain, having Burple be the one carrying the nest to the top while the others carry the eggs. But anyways, on their way back, Finked is having the joy of his life flying with the rescue riders, which they do remind him that he's been causing some trouble way too often, and they do show some flashbacks to exemplify this. But anyways, they drop off Finked back at his home, and they return to the roost where everyone is completely exhausted from adventuring, where we humorously have Burple sleep flying and bumping into Winger. And of all the team, Winger's the only one who's still unwearied, and he has his philosophy on life being all about adventures and not having rest time, which I will unfortunately disagree, since there's going to be a point where he's going to need to relax so he can rejuvenate. But anyways, on the next day, the team decide that they're gonna occupy their time on a vacation, and with the help of Summer, the team has their sights on a location that they want to spend their vacation at. So they prep themselves and fill up some barrels with supplies they're gonna bring along, and while they're doing so, they're unaware that Finked has sneaked into the roost, and with some stealthiness, he snuck into a barrel of fish, which I believe was very unsanitary in there, so that's kind of disgusting. But anyways, the team head off to the island. And on the way, Burple has to be so antsy and is like, "Are we there yet?" repeatedly. And I'm like, "Shut up, Burple." And even Summer is irritated by his impatience as well. But after some time of flying, they finally reach this distant island. And we see Burple just swallowing a countless amount of rock. And we have Cutter and Aggro taking a nap together, which propels their dynamic a bit. And then we have Winger, who wants to continue target practicing because I guess relaxation isn't part of his persona. And so he had Burple bring along the training props. Then Winger decides to do a flyover around the island because he wants to continue being vigilant. And the others urge him to relax, and he just flies down and says, "What? I am relaxed," with a hilarious smuggy grin he expresses just before he follows up with, "I'm just gonna do one more flyover of the beach," which everyone laughs at him for. Then suddenly, the dragon's worst fear emerges from the sea: eels. And Cutter and Aggro are in a more dangerous spot because they're napping on a rock that's surrounded by eels climbing onto it. But good thing the team is able to fight them off, especially the convenience for Burple because he collected a lot of rocks earlier. All of the commotion does wake up Cutter and Aggro, and they are able to flee just before the eels get to them. But now the beach area is infested with eels, the team decides to move on to the land section of the island. And from there, they're gonna do some camping. And as they are about to set up, Finked emerges from the fish barrel and surprises everyone. But for Fink's safety, the team tell him that they're gonna have to take him back to Huttsgalor, much to his disappointment. Then, a pack of wolves chase Finked, and the rescue riders do battle them, but the effects aren't good enough to stop the wolves from pursuing the kid. Then, Finked reaches a territory of exotic plants, and these plants do scare off the wolf. Anyways, the day begins to dawn, and therefore it is a little too late to return Finked back to his home, so the team has no choice but to keep him in his care while they camp. And at night, Finked is a bit of a good asset as he helps feed the dragons and make a few nests for the team to sleep on. But it turns out the nest he made were made out of wood netters, which they were the exotic plants that scared off the wolves earlier. And we see why that's the case, because these plants cause anyone to itch. And since the team did just lay on it, they're all itchy and excessively scratching themselves. They do find a nearby pool of water, so they quickly jump into it so the water can help ease their itch. The team do express their opinions on this vacation, and Dak would mention that Fink's presence brings trouble, and he says it right when Finked is behind him, which really hurt his feeling. So he just runs away in distraught. And Dak feels really bad for him, so him and his team go search for Finked. and they do find him isolated in a cave just singing to himself. They arrive to console him, and he just reveals how much guilt he feels for ruining their experience. Just then, a pack of wolves arrive at the cave too and corner everyone. And these wolves are smart enough to make sure that the dragons waste their powers on them so they would run out by the time they would attack. Then, Finked does some really good redeeming for himself, and he finds some wood nettles hidden in a corner of the cave, which we should all remember wolves are afraid of these plants, and Finked dresses himself with these wood nettles and scares off all the wolves out of the cave, making him the hero. Dak does apologize for his hurtful comments about Finked and explains how much he understands Fink's sentiment, and does give him a glow up that he is still awesome no matter who he is, and these statements make Finked feel more humble. Then we have the team flying Finked and themselves back to Huttsgalor, and the episode ends. Okay, finally an episode I actually like from this season, and it was a really change of pace here, considering the team mostly focused their lifestyle on adventures, which is the notion that Winger looks at. And this episode really began propelling Fink's character arc, really giving him some redeemers here after the bevy of problems he brought to the rescue riders. And I do believe this was a very strong episode for him. Now we jump into episode 5 of season 2, called Treasure Riders, and it begins with the team flying over the seas to look for some fish to feast on. Then we cut to them enjoying their fish for their lunch, and we have Cutter hilariously eating a giant pile of fish while everyone just stares at him speechless. Anyways, the twins suggest to get some dessert, and they head off to pick berries from the bushes. And while they're doing that, they're suddenly attacked by wolves who corner them, but then they are saved by a man who fends off these wolves. And he's really got some moves and skills to outsmart these enemies. Even the twins and the dragons who would eventually arrive are impressed by him. Afterwards, the man introduces himself as Waldondo, and he has a quest to reunite with an old friend of his. And based on his personality, I bet his old friend was Marina, which he corroborates it. The team decides to help out and fly him over to Marina's house. And the two of them seem to kind of have a frenemy relationship, which is kind of a compelling dynamic. Anyways, Waldondo presents Marina a map to Odin's Gem, which Odin's Gem is a historical artifact, and he wants to search for it with Marina. She initially refuses, but changes her mind the minute the team decides to come along. So they take off into the air, and based on the map, they're instructed to head to a secret island, which is called Isle of Lost Vikings. They reach the island, and Cutter's able to use his eyesight to spot a cave. So they land in front of it and light up the lanterns. And Dak is super stoked to find a gem inside, just for Marina to warn him about the dangers that could occur in the cave. But Waldondo scoffs it and proceeds to lead everyone through the cave, in which midway, he steps on a button that triggers a booby trap, but Winger is able to destroy it with his power blast, so kudos to him. Next, they proceed further only to come across a dead end, which they have someone aggro waste their powers on, just for Marina to pull a lever that opens it up. Next, they come to another section which are just full of statues, but they are rigged with spikes, so the dragons work together to deactivate all the armed statues. Which here, I should also mention that Burple isn't present because he stayed behind under Marina's instructions. So yeah, he's missing out on the adventure that's currently happening right now. Anyways, everyone continues on and they reach the exit of the cave. And they all spot an abandoned ship, so they head over to find the gem there. They search around until Waldondo leads them to a trap door in which Winger opens, and the team heads down to check what's in there, only for Waldondo to lock the team up under the trap door and trap Marina under a net, which was a very cold betrayal he did right here, and his whole intentions were to capture the rescue riders because he claims they were his treasure all along. But Waldondo is so stupid to forget that Burple isn't present, so he should have made sure that everyone was in attendance to trap all of them. But now this opens up the door for Burple to rescue them in the case that he discovers what happened. Anyways, Waldondo leaves a trapped Marina stranded on the beach while he departs on the ship with the team trapped under the deck. And we find out that the dragons are unable to use their powers because they used most of them along the journeys. So their next tactic was to all ram the trap door. but it is too strong for them and the ram technique doesn't work out for them. Then suddenly, Marina pops up by the window and reveals that she is with Burple, who turned out to be following them the whole time under Marina's instructions, which was a cautious in the case something happened, in which her instincts were correct. And so we can obviously tell that Burple was able to free Marina out of the nest she was trapped in and flew after the ship the rescue riders were on. So now the two of them have a plan, with Marina combating Waldondo as a distraction while Burple uses his swallowed rocks to break free the trap door to rescue his team. And the plan works out successfully and everyone is about to escape just as Waldondo uses a rope to latch onto Burple's tail. But Summer and Angro are able to combine their powers, water and fire together because it creates a smokescreen effect, easily blinds Waldondo, just for Marino to swing in and tie him up to the mast, and escapes with Burple, leaving Waldondo trapped as a good comeuppance for what he just did to the team. So that was pretty satisfying, but also, this isn't the last time we're gonna see Waldondo. So anyways, they return back to Huttsgalor, and Marina reveals that she had the gem the whole time in her belt. So that explains why she refused to go, and only went because the rescue riders wanted to come along with Waldondo, unaware that he was going to double cross them. So Marina has some good instincts on this situation, and thankfully elected Burple to stay back in the case something happened, in which it did. Anyways, Marina decides to give Burple a possession of the gem, and he swallows it and keeps it safe, just as Marina disappears. And that ends episode 5 right there. And this was a thrilling episode. Waldondo was a very interesting character, and I'm glad we're going to see more of him down the road, considering at this moment the team have a lot of animosity towards him after his attempt to capture them. So it'll be cool to see what he does to make up to them for his diabolical act. And this was also a really great episode for Marina, because knowing what her old friend was capable of, she had to concept a plan to maneuver around in the case everyone was being double-crossed by him. And it shows that her instincts were correct, and thankfully she relied on Burple being the one to assist her on this plan. Now let's jump into episode 6 of season 2 called Tough Enough, and begins with the team just doing another round of training, but this time the dragons have to fire at moving targets. Anyways, Elbow arrives and informs the team that he heard noises from the maze caves that sounded like a dragon. So everyone heads over to the front entrance of the cave. Just then, Elbon leaves the job up for the team as he departs to collect some shells for his new business, which running many kinds of businesses is what Elbon usually does. Anyways, the team embark into the cave and they find the dragon, who is clearly lost in there, and she introduces herself as Zepla, and she's classified as a puffertail because when she's afraid, she'll inflate like a balloon. And she does explain that she got lost in the caves when she was trying to escape a pack of wolves, which is understandable. But the rescue riders lead her out of the cave and they give her a bit of a tour around the town of Huttsgalor, in which she watches Winger saving Haggis from falling off crates and Cutter saving a citizen after he fell off a ladder. Then they bring Zepla to the roost, and she gets too much excitement there that she inflates as well when she's excited. She wants the team to help train her so she could create her own version of her rescue riders back at her island, which this does get followed up on in the future. So this was a nice setup. Anyways, the team tries to do a few training techniques, but Zepla just keeps messing up on them because of her inconsistencies. And when she does try to fire a shot while inflated, too much gas is ignited in her, which causes her to fly maniacally in the air. Afterwards, Layla, Summer, Cutter, and Burple decide to check out Elbone's little shell business, but he's not present at his stand nor his home, so his lack of presence can be an implication that he has subjected himself into trouble again. So now the team has a rescue mission, and Zepla wants to join in as well, but the team are unsure of it. But after a brief debate, they decide to have her tag along as we see her in the background blundering everything and even colliding into a wall and falling down. Anyways, they fly around the island to find Elbone, and Zepla does struggle to keep up because she kind of has a height limit to where if she goes past that, she'll inflate in fear. And we do see that happen. So because of that, the team decide to all split off in different subgroups, with Layla, Summer, and Burple on one end of the island, Dak, Winger, and Cutter flying over the vicinity, and Zepla and Agro investigating the other side of the island. And so they all separate, and we have Agro and Zepla checking out the beach area, in which Zepla just searches in a tiny log while Agro spots something, so she flies away, causing Zepla to lose sight of her. Then we have Cutter, Winger, and Dak flying around just for them to spot a panicking Zeppela inflated, and so they interact with her where she explains that she has lost sight of Aggro, so they opt to help her out. Then they find Aggro and Elbow, who are stuck in quicksand. So that proves that the theory of Elbow being in danger was correct. But anyways, trouble begins brewing more when Zeppela panics again and inflates, knocking Cutter, Winger, and Dak into the quicksand as well, so now they're stuck. Zeppela feels very incriminated on what she's caused and offers to scout for Layla, Burple, and Summer, but she's got no time because everyone is sinking so quickly into the quicksand. So at this moment, all the hopes are on her, and Winger tries to build up her confidence that motivates her to rescue everyone. She tries to pull Winger out by his ears, but it doesn't work out, so her next tactic is to inflate herself so the breeze of the wind can be a strong supporter when she pulls everyone out. And so Winger lets out his tail and she grabs onto it while he's able to hold on to Dak and everyone else is able to grip onto each other like a chain. And so Zeppela tries to pull them up and there's progress, but then she starts to slow back down until she does something that she did earlier, in which she fires out her flame that ignites the gas inside of her, which added enough force for her to pull everyone out of the quicksand and back into the air. They are all thankful for Zeppela being the hero. Just then, Burple, Summer, and Layla arrive to see that the team has found Elbow, but they really missed out a lot. Afterwards, the team returned Elbow back to his home, and they head back to the roost where Zeppela is grateful for the team helping her out and vows to continue practicing until she's good enough to form her own rescue team. She bids her farewells and inflates herself to leave. And that's the ending. This episode was fun. I really like Zeppela's role on this episode where she really developed herself despite her struggles. And this was kind of reminiscent to Finked's situation 2 episodes ago, where they would cause some issues around the team but then become the hero for them at the end. And Zeppela brought some fun humor that made this episode very enjoyable and thrilling to watch. Now we go into episode 7 of season 2 called Hot Hot Hot, which is another episode focusing on Burple again. Alright, the episode begins with Burple rescuing all of his friends from danger, only for it to be a dream when he woke up to Winger calling him. Anyways, the team discovered that Aggro slept outside all night with a fire lit next to her. Then they go to the town where they discover that Magnus has gathered everyone to present his second version of his Mechano-Dragon, which nobody is that amazed considering the result of the previous invention. And since nobody needs rescuing, it's simply unneeded at this moment, which doesn't amuse Magnus well. Anyways, we follow up with the Aggro plot, and we get segments of her continuing to sneak out of the roost and be stationary at locations with very hot temperature. But the team continues to follow her and bring her back to the roost, which she's irritated by. So then when the dragons are napping, Burple elects to monitor Aggro overnight, and he even offers her a blanket, which would be a bad idea, especially since Burple eventually fell asleep, which gave Aggro the time to sneak off again. So now the team searches for her again, and they start to connect the dots and head over to a volcano to find her, and they do. Aggro is inside the volcano, stationary on a little perch. And this time she finally explains that she is molting, which dragons like her need heat to molt faster. And the reason she didn't explain it to her friends is because she was embarrassed. It seems like she's had enough molting, so she tries to fly out, but the temperature of the volcano overheated her, so it now impaired her ability to fly, thus making this a rescue mission. So the team try whatever they can to reach Aggro. First Cutter flies in, but the heat of the volcano scorched him a bit. Then Winger makes an attempt, and he almost reaches Aggro, but he's way too overheated by the volcano, and so he's forced to fall back. So the next tactic is to have Burple fly into the volcano while he's carrying barrels of ice. And he almost reaches Aggro, but the ice barrels disintegrate, so he's forced to return back. So the team's next choice is something that they did not want to resort to, but now their choice is to request Magnus to use his Mechano-Dragon to help Aggro, in which obviously he refuses because of his animosity towards the team. But it takes Dak and Layla's strong words and tricks to convince Magnus to help out. So Magnus and Axel come along with their Mechano-Dragon, and Axel operates the machine into the volcano, and he's able to use its claws to grip onto Aggro, and they are able to make some progress, but the heat begins to disintegrate the machine, causing Winger to dive down to help. But the claws break apart, and Aggro is dropped onto a perch that is closer to the lava. Meanwhile, Winger has no choice but to carry the machine with Axel on it back to the surface. and now Magnus's Mechano Dragon is partially destroyed, and he blames the team for setting him up, and he and Axel leave the volcano. Now the team is desperate to find another technique to rescue Aggro. Layla does check some leftover machine pieces which are made out of Belgium, so they are able to withstand the heat. So these pieces can be put onto a dragon so they could wear it like armor. Then we have Winger make a dramatic speech about the situation, just to be interrupted by Burple, who offers to be the one to rescue Aggro, so he'll be wearing the Belgium armor. The team agree, and they do a procedure to help Burple prepare. He swallows a few pieces of metal, which they're used as a magnet to attach the Belgium onto his body. Now he flies into the volcano to rescue Aggro, and he reaches her and carries her back to the surface. And I do see that Aggro has fully molted, and now she's even brighter. She apologizes for not informing her friends earlier that she was molting because she was embarrassed. And everyone consoles her and explains that dragons always molt and that she's not alone in this process. Anyways, the team are now heading back to their home while we have a final moment of seeing Magnus and Axel row on the remains of their Mechano Dragon like a boat, and that's the ending of that episode. A pretty decent one, a bit stagnant at the beginning, but kind of picked up once the climax hit. In this case, Aggro being stuck inside the volcano. And there's also an interesting fact that a clip from this episode was uploaded on YouTube months before the Season 2 trailer came out, so this was kind of like an in-advance preview for what Season 2 was going to entail. But so far up to this point, it's just been fine, but we'll see if my opinions change with the last few episodes. Now we move on to episode 8 of season 2 called High Anxiety, and it begins with the team just having breakfast and Burple trying to act like a human. But he acts way too foolish to the point where he breaks the entrance bridge to the roost. So now the team decides to head over to Hannah's shop to request for her help, and which she does so and uses metal to fix the bridge. And now it's even stronger and can accommodate the weight for a dragon, making it more available. The team offer Hannah a flight back to the town, but she refuses, which will be explained later on. But anyways, they head back to her blacksmith shop where Dak wants to learn how blacksmithing works. So Hannah teaches him. Just then, 4 baby silver-tailed ironclaws wreak havoc in the town, and so the team are scrambling to catch them. But Summer is able to stop them and gather them in front of her so the team can bring them back to their home. They find the silver-tailed ironclaw's nest, but the mother dragon isn't there, so they drop off the babies and leave Aggro and Burple to watch over them while they go search for the mother dragon. And they do spot her on another mountain where they see that she has her right wing trapped under a pile of rocks. They move the rocks out of the way, and when she attempts to take off, she feels too much pain on her wing, which has now grounded her at this moment. The team decide that Hannah would be the best person to help them out, since the mother dragon's wing is made out of metal and Hannah's a blacksmith, so there's convenience right there. The team head back to her shop to request for her help, even labeling her as a dragon doctor if she does so. She does initially accept, until the team inform Hannah that they're gonna have to bring her to the mother dragon, who is located on the top of a mountain. Hannah then awkwardly refuses and admits that she has a fear of heights, in reference to why she refused to take a flight back to town earlier. And I do feel bad for Hannah in this spot. She's been offered a job to do, but it requires her to face her phobias, which she's clearly not used to doing. So Dak insists that he'll bring Hannah's tools to the mountain and he'll do the job, confident that he's learned enough on blacksmithing thanks to Hannah. And it's like these next scenes are assigning a test to Dak to see if he's able to do blacksmithing like Hannah. So we'll see if he can pass the test. Alright, they head back to the mountain with Hannah's tools. And it's also kind of funny that they had Cutter be the one to stay alone with the mother dragon to keep her company, considering last time she chastised him for his tricks. And we do see when he tries to cheer her up, she's expressing a lot of annoyance with him, clearly indicative of her somewhat animosity towards Cutter. Anyways, the team return with Hannah's tools, and Dak tries to use them to help out the dragon. He does struggle a bit and does a very sloppy job completing it, but he's able to implant some metal onto the dragon's wing. So now she makes an attempt to fly, but the metal breaks off, so Dak failed the test right there. And now the mother dragon is sliding down the slope of the mountain, and the team follow her in pursuit. And they are able to save her in time before she slides off the cliff. But due to her weight, the edge of the cliff begins to crack a bit, which is really worrying for the mama dragon's situation. So the twins ask Cutter to retrieve Burple and Aggro, which we cut back to them, and they are taking good care of the baby dragons, feeding them fish. But Cutter arrives and asks them to come along, so they bring the baby dragons along as well. Which the presence of the baby dragon cheers up the mother a bit because she's reunited with her children. But then the cliff's edge begins to break apart more, so now Winger suggests that they need to ask Hanar one more time for her help. So Dak and Winger arrive back at the blacksmith shop to ask Hanar one more time. She does feel bad because she really wants to be helpful, but her fear of heights is hindering her from doing so. Then Winger makes a very dramatic speech about how he and his friends had their fears before, but they were able to face up to it, exemplifying the past occurrences, like Burple with Hugenboo, Summer with the eels, and Winger with his Mega Blast. And his moral speech is so overdramatic with a glowing sunlight effect behind him, just for Dak to remind him that Hanar does not speak dragon language, which I kind of forgot as well. So this adds humor to this scene, and Dak does try to translate what Winger said to Hanar, but he's so incompetent with his ability to speak professionally like Winger. Anyways, Hanar has the idea to reinforce the situation for her, in which she hides in a barrel so Winger and Dak can carry her up to the top of the mountain. And they do that, and once they arrive, Hanar puts in work, bending 3 metals thanks to some help from the dragons, and then she implements them onto the mother dragon's wing, and she gets 2 done, but when she's about to complete the 3rd one, the cliff's edge breaks, causing the mother dragon and the team to fall down the mountain. And during the fall, Hanar is determined to finish her job, so she reaches the 3rd metal and completes the implant process, allowing the mother dragon to fly again and save everyone who was falling with her. Everyone reaches back to the top of the mountain, and the mother dragon thanks Hanar and the team for helping her out. And when the team acknowledge how Hanar overcame her fear of heights, she still expresses her phobia of it and returns back into the barrel, waiting for the team to carry her back to Huttsgalor. And so the team say their goodbyes, grab the barrel Hanar is in, and head off back home, and that's where the episode ends. I really love how much highlight was put onto Hanar this episode, considering we didn't really get to focus much on her in the first season. And with this episode, she shows her values to the team, and the work she puts in really encompasses her invaluable characteristic. And watching that makes this episode very thrilling. Now we go into episode 9 of season 2 called King Burple. Another Burple-centric episode, yay. Alright, the episode begins with Burple practicing catching skills, with Dak and Winger dropping elbow dolls for him to catch, but he fails multiple times, and instead of catching an elbow doll, he catches an aggro instead. Anyways, Elbone arrives at the roost and is flabbergasted after seeing a doll that resembles him, and he says that it reminds him of his twin brother Albone, whose obviously name and pronunciation is identical to Elbone's, but his name starts with A instead. And this brief mentioning of him is a bit of a foreshadowing for something that happens in Heroes of the Sky. But anyways, Albone is there to request the rescue riders to help him find his pet rock Rocky and his pet shell Shelly, who I didn't mention, but he found a shell and kept it as a pet a few episodes ago. But now that he lost them, the team decided to help him search for them. They fly for a bit and they make it to a sea stack zone where they split off into different groups. And so Burple and Cutter go on the east side, and they encounter a storm that blows them back all the way to another island, where Cutter lands on a tree branch and Burple crash lands onto a wolf who was about to attack a little dragon. And so he's able to stun the wolf and also knock it away, spitting rocks at him. The little dragon hails Burple as his hero, and his crew arrive to declare Burple as their new king. And this labeling does make Burple get a little power hungry. Anyways, we return back with the team, who reunite at the sea stack zone, and each group explained they had no luck finding Elbone's shell and rock in the directions they went, but they all decided to go east since Cutter and Burple never returned from that side. Back at the island, the little dragon introduces himself as Oscar and tours Burple and Cutter around in the Flyhopper village, where flyhoppers inhabit in. And they live inside the trees to protect themselves from the wolves, but now since Burple arrived to rescue them, the faction feels safe enough to return to the surface. And then when Cutter makes some one-liners, the flyhoppers just laugh at him, looking at him as some kind of joke and declaring him as like the king's clown, which is kind of in line with his trickster nature. But the labeling of clown does not sit well with Cutter at all. And because Burple is the king, he's being catered a big feast to enjoy, while Cutter is completely shut out of it and can only feast on it when he's last. So that's unfortunate for him. Meanwhile, with the team, they do find Elbone's ship crashed onto the shore of an island, and Elbone is able to find his shell there, but not his rock. So now they have to find Rocky in an area that comprises more than 100 rocks. So that's going to be a lot of work for them to do. Back with King Burple, he is just having the time of his life, being powerful, feasting on a pile of apples, while Cutter is just laying there, unamused by everything. But Burple is nice enough to share an apple with his friend, but Cutter declines it, which did come off a bit childish right there. But anyways, the two of them do hear wolf sounds, and they fly up, and Cutter uses his eyesight to spot a pack of wolves approaching the Flyhopper village. So now Burple has to find a way to protect the Flyhoppers, since it is his responsibility as king. After all, he did save them, and they are under the impression that he'll be able to protect them in no time. But Burple knows he won't be able to protect them for much long. So I think it's about time for Burple to be himself and not act like someone who he's not. And so he calls a meeting with the Flyhoppers and requests them to return back to the trees, but they still believe Burple will keep them safe no matter the circumstances, so that meeting was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, with the team, they've looked through more than at least several rocks and threw them into a pile if it's not the one they're looking for. But Elbone has to be so idiotic and spots a rock that he thinks it resembles Rocky, and he runs straight for it right in front of an oncoming traffic of Dak and Winger, who had a weird flying system to search for the rock. But Elbone causes Dak and Winger to make a sharp turn, and they crash into the pile of rocks, scattering all over the place. So things get really messy there. But back with King Burple, he decides to try and be honest about himself to the Flyhoppers, but they still don't believe him and think that he'll have no issue protecting him from the wolves. But then Burple comes up with an idea that the Flyhoppers could do in the case they face a situation with the wolves again. And so when the pack of wolves arrive at the Flyhopper village, the Flyhoppers do a surprise attack with apples that really scares off the wolves, and their teamwork pays off. But with that, the Flyhoppers are able to demonstrate that they are capable of fending off against wolves if they're able to execute on their teamwork skills correctly. And King Burple does make an announcement that he is no longer the king and declares that Oscar should be the king, which I believe should have been the case to begin with, since it always felt like Oscar would be the one that has the most efficiency to rule his colony. But after that, the Flyhoppers say their goodbyes to Burple and Cutter as they head off to return back with the team. And we return back to them where we see that they have completely given up searching for Rocky. Then Cutter and Burple arrive to help them out, and Burple easily finds Rocky, which, wow. It took one dragon to easily find it over a few of them all together searching. Elbone thanks Burple for his help, and everyone heads back home, which concludes the episode. And I found this episode pretty riveting. It was interesting to see Burple try and go power hungry and play up this aura that he isn't. But he would learn that he would just have to try and be himself in order to evade circumstances that could worsen for his sake. And it was nice enough for Cutter to be the one to talk fruitfully with him about it, which was a nice change of character for him. Now it's time for episode 10 of season 2, called Charged Up. Oh boy. And the episode begins with the team having their dragons practice firing at targets to see who can knock it back the farthest. And obviously, Wayner blasts it the farthest because a power blast has the most knockback effect to it. And he awkwardly responds with, "Oops, sorry." Obviously him trying to not rub it in, which was very funny. Anyways, the team are on their way back to the roost. Then all of a sudden, a bunch of fireballs are shooting at them from the forest. So they go in to investigate. And when they reach the surface, they don't see anyone, but just some small baby flames ignited around the forest. So they extinguish them. So then it's the next day, and the team are just enjoying their breakfast. Then Duggar walks in and presents them to Spicy found, which was very alarming. And things get more complex when the team find out that their target props are missing. So then they go fly to the village to investigate, and they discover that Magnus is gathered everyone to check out his new Mechano Dragon, the third version, and he has elevated it a bit where it has the ability to fire all those powers combined of Summer, Burple, Aggro, and Cutter's powers, except for Wingers, because Power Blasts have a lot of scientific measures to create them, and Magnus can't really do that, so yeah. The people are impressed by his new Mechano Dragon, which annoys the team and Duggar because he has a sculpture of Haggis that he has exhibited in the middle of the town, but no one is putting focus on it and instead paying attention more so to Magnus's invention. And of course, his intentions was to make his Mechano Dragon more useful than the rescue riders so the villagers wouldn't need them anymore. obviously showing no dignity right there. But the team does not back down, and Magnus would challenge them to prove which dragon is better, and he's confident that it's going to be his Mechano Dragon, which, sure. So their challenge is going to take place in the Boiling Springs Valley, where the competition is a race to retrieve an album doll at the end of the valley, and the participants are obviously going to be the Mechano Dragon against Aggro, but because the Mechano Dragon is made of Belzium, it has an advantage and is able to surpass Aggro's lead and win the challenge. But then they have another challenge in sealing off the valley from the town, and Magnus's Mechano Dragon does make so many attempts but fails, allowing Winger to use his Power Blast, and he is successful, really showing that Magnus's Mechano Dragon is missing one key power, which is a Power Blast, and he admits that he can't make a Power Blast for his invention. So later on that night, we see him scrambling to outline ideas on how to create a Power Blast, and the timing became very conducive for him because a lightning storm is occurring at that moment. And so Magnus does some modifications to his invention and then waits for lightning to strike it so the machine could charge up a Power Blast, in which when the lightning does strike it, it charges up the invention and fires a Power Blast at a tree that obliterates it. Magnus and Axel are satisfied by their work and they go to sleep, unaware that more lightning was going to strike at the machine, overcharging it in the process. And that was a bad idea as soon as Magnus wakes up in the morning to discover that his invention has disappeared, indicating that when the lightning struck it, it overcharged the machine, allowing it to self-operate. At the roost, the rescue riders wake up to some ruckus and they immediately fly out to investigate, and they discover that the Mechano Dragon is wreaking havoc in the Huttsgalor. They do spot Axel and Magnus hiding behind a home, so they fly towards them, where Magnus explains the situation and what he's caused. And now the team outlined their plan to save the town. Winger and Dak will be dealing with the Mechano Dragon, while everyone else is going to be protecting the villagers from any oncoming attack from the Mechano Dragon. So the team put the plan into motion, and we see Dak and Winger try to Power Blast at the Mechano Dragon, but it's completely unaffected by any attack. So then the other dragons come to assist Winger, and they try to use their powers on the Mechano Dragon, but it's completely ineffective as well. Then there is a bit of progress when Burple spits out some metallic piece that attaches to the mechanic dragon because the Belzium is magnetic, so any metallic piece that is nearby will be magnetized to it. And so the team uses it as an advantage, and once the Mechano Dragon has magnetized too much metal pieces, it begins to lose its stability. And after it chases Winger for a bit, who is able to dodge his attack with his sick flying skills, it begins to fall apart. Winger continues to fly away from it, but begins to lose his pacing. So now the rest of the team are trying to figure out a way to assist Winger, and this is where Layla comes up with an idea to have the 4 other dragons do a synchronized attack at the Mechano Dragon, which they are able to execute with the 4 other dragons all firing their powers together at the Mechano Dragon, completely destroying it and dropping its remains into the forest. But with that, they are able to save the day once again, and the town cheers, while Magnus is obviously dissatisfied and just blows them a raspberry, which is the most childish thing he could do. But before the episode ends, there has to be some melodrama where we pan over to the forest where we see the head of the Mechano Dragon beginning to function again, only for Haggis to ram into it and shut it down. Therefore, that's the ending of this episode. And I will say, this might be the most forgotten episode of Rescue Riders, simply because it's barely acknowledged. And I will say, this episode felt like a carbon copy of Mecha-Menace, with a few minor differences to its plotline. But either way, it felt very identical with the narrative of Magnus showing off his new invention to the villagers, and it's going to be better than the Rescue Riders, only for the machine to eventually cause trouble in the town, assigning a task for the Rescue Riders to stop the machine. So that was makes this episode similar to Mecha-Menace, just with a more glorified climax. And also the back half of the episode primarily focusing on the battle, which could have been fun, but it felt really baseline, which sadly doesn't make this episode stand out at all, and sadly makes this episode very forgettable. Anyways, now we go into episode 11 of season 2 called Belly Flop, and it begins with Summer giving diving lessons to Dak, Winger, Aggro, and Tutter. And while they're having fun with these lessons, Layla and Burple fly over to Albon's ship where they request him for a variety of fish, which is for Summer's birthday surprise, the 7 spice seafood surprise. And Elbon is really skilled with fishing to the point where I'm like, this should be the career he should be staying at since it's in line with his hobby, instead of spiraling for different kind of businesses that ends up flopping. After serving Layla and Burple to fish, Elbon spots something in the distance and decides to head over there just as Layla and Burple depart and return back to the roost where Layla is making the 7-spice seafood surprise. Once she finishes making it, Summer surprisingly arrives and Burple needs to stall her while Layla is cleaning up the messes she made. And Burple is an incompetent liar and he eventually just gives in and lets Summer into the roost, only for her to spot Layla just sitting down reading her diary. Layla and Summer decide that they're gonna go to the town and they are joined by Burple and Agro, and Layla quickly whispers to Dak the location of the seafood meal she made. Afterwards, while Layla, Summer, Agro, and Burple approach the town, they spot that Elbon is missing from his shop, and they see his boat that is about to collide a man in a rowboat, so they save the man just before the boat could do so, and they find out that Elbon's not there. And when Elbon is missing, it means that he put himself in trouble, so they go to search for him. Dak, Winger, and Cutter find the seafood meal, and they hide it in a bucket and cover it with hay, but they did not hide it good enough, and Haggis would find and eat it. Anyways, back with the others, they fly around a beach and they spot a sea dragon on the shore, in which Layla identifies it as a sea gronkle. So they go to ask him on the whereabouts of Elbon, and he's just not giving any sufficient answers besides just introducing himself as Gludge. But then as the team is about to leave, they hear Elbon screams and realize that he's inside the sea gronkle's house, meaning that Gludge accidentally ate him. Returning to Dak, Winger, and Cutter, Dak suggests that he can make a replacement seafood meal, which the others do question if he has the skill to do so, and he's confident he can recreate the recipe. So let's see about that. Anyways, back with Gludge, Layla and Summer try to ask him to open his mouth, but he refuses and is just too stubborn to cooperate. Back at the roost, Dak tries to recreate the seafood meal recipe, and what do you know? I guess he doesn't know culinary. He's super unskilled, and his food is disgusting that nobody enjoys them at all, even Haggis. Back with Gludge, we see the team try many ways to make him open his mouth, but when it comes to Summer's method of feeding him fish, he eats them along with Summer as well, so now she's inside his mouth with Elbon. The team completely chastised him for what he did, but he doesn't believe he did so, which came off extremely ignorant of him, and he's trying to excuse this because he has tiny eyes, but it's more so because he has this ego that makes him completely delusional to anything he does. But now that Summer is stuck inside as well, Layla decides that she needs Winger's Power Blast to help open up Gludge's mouth. So she and Burple head over back to the roost while Agro stays behind to distract Gludge. At the roost, we see Dak try to make one more seafood meal, but nobody wants it, and Winger's like, no more, and Cutter is just so over it. Even Haggis just flees once Dak presents him the dish. Dak just gives up and tosses it in the bare garbage along with the rest of the meals everyone spat inside it. Then Layla and Burple arrive just to be surprised by the mess, which Dak explains the situation to her. But then when she sees the garbage barrel of Dak's rotten meals, she figures an idea that she can utilize with it, so she encourages Dak, Winger, and Cutter to bring it. Once they arrive back with Gludge, they present him the barrel of Dak's gross seafood meals, and he consumes it, unaware how rotten it is, and the gross effect works on him, causing him to barf everything inside his mouth, including Summer and Elbon. Gludge is completely disgusted by what he swallowed and leaves back into the sea. And everyone heads back home and the episode ends. This was a joy of an episode. I had a lot of amusement with Dak's debacle with his cooking, which he clearly has no skills to. And it was a pretty interesting concept of this being set for Summer's birthday, in which I kind of wish there was a segment at the end where they were celebrating her birthday. But either way, I still had some amusement with this episode, and I had a lot of enjoyment. Okay, we're going into episode 12 of season 2, the finale, and it's called Game of Horns. And it begins with the team having the dragons practice shooting the target as fast as they can, and everyone does well except for Burple because he struggles to work under pressure. Then they head over to the town where the townspeople are assembled for an announcement from Duggard. And he's officially declaring the festivals of festivals, which this town is always full of festivals. And Duggard just goes down a list of random things the festival entails, in which when he mentions poetry, Winger responds with, I like writing poetry. What? It relaxes me. It's so funny. But anyways, the main intrigue from the festival is the Game of Horns, which is about competing against the current chief, which is Duggar, to earn the title of Chief of Huttsgalor. And to participate, all it needs is someone to volunteer, and the first person to do so is Magnus, which what an unsurprising thing for him to do, because if he was the chief, he would be such a train wreck and be the downfall of Huttsgalor. Elrond also volunteers, but I think it's pretty easy to count him out. And then there was another guy who initially wanted to, but then backed down. So yeah. Duggar heads inside the hall and is unsure of his chances, but the rescue riders do assure him to persevere and stay motivated. So we get a short little segments of each challenger practicing and preparing, and then now, the Game of Horns competition begins. And in the first 3 challengers, Magnus easily wins with the help of his Mechano-Dragon and his family member in Axel assisting him, which is a dumb aspect that's allowed in the competition. The team and Duggar realize that the chances are getting way more slimmer because of Magnus's advantages, and a panicked Duggar runs into the hall having so much doubt, and the team follow him inside to find a solution for him. And then we get this very historical moment of Duggar adopting Layla and Dak, as he felt like a fatherly figure to them. And we do see the emotions hit for all the characters when they all gather around Duggar to give a group hug, which this was a very touching moment. And it's also in a way to help benefit Duggar, because now his adopted children can be an asset to him in the competition. So the competition continues, and we see the assistance Duggar gets from the team really paying off. First with Cutter launching a boulder that lands farther than Magnus's. Next, Winger power blasting a tree that drops a vast of apples, accumulating more than the amount of apples Magnus and Elrond picked. Then a dancing competition where Elrond is baseline and Magnus is as cringy as ever, while Duggar initially squanders, but Dak and Winger joining in tap dancing, which they both have really good dancing skills. And then at this point, both Duggar and Magnus have scored up to 25 points each, while Elrond only scored 1 from a fishing task because that's his usual hobby. So basically it was in favor for him. Anyways, it now becomes a showdown between Magnus and Duggar, and their competition is going to be a race around the island, which is a very basic tiebreaker competition. Magnus is obviously going to be using his Mechano-Dragon, so Duggar is going to have the help of the rescue riders. But of course, Magnus being Magnus is going to try forging his way to victory. And so he gets the rescue riders stuck in Slinkwing goo, except for Burple because he underestimates him too much. But now all hope is on Burple to help Duggar win. And we do get a lot of follow-up with him having to work under pressure, which he's still not good at. Which is true, we've seen before that he is not really good in situations that require quick thinking. But not because of the control of the situation, Burple needs to step up his game, and so he participates with Duggar and Layla, who removed herself from the goo by taking off her boots. And Dak does the same thing but stays behind to free the dragons. But now the race competition begins, and Magnus is leading while Burple, Layla, and Duggar struggle through many parts like the Boiling Valley and the snow region. And at this point, Magnus's Mechano-Dragon is slowly walking down the hill before it ends right before the finish line, where Magnus gets off and begins boasting about his upcoming victory, which was so nauseating, and he was being so cocky that he couldn't even just walk through the finish line in order to make it official, instead wasting time rubbing in his victory with his speech, which was very ludicrous of him. Burple, Layla, and Duggar do make it to the top of the hill and spot that Magnus is about to win, and Burple is about to throw in the towel, but Layla motivates him to persevere and learn how to work under pressure. Burple realizes what he could do, so he instructs Layla and Duggar to get off his back because he's going to start rolling down the hill and hopefully roll through the finish line. And this method does cause a bit of an earthquake around the town, in which the townspeople are able to spot that it is Burple approaching. Magnus sees him and quickly sprints and tries to hop through the finish line, but he is just an inch short, just as Burple rolls over him and through the finish line, winning the race for Duggar, meaning Duggar stays as the chief of Huttsgalor. And everyone is stoked, except for Magnus obviously. But anyways, a ceremony gathers where Duggar is rightfully crowned with his chief helmet and praises his adopted kids and dragons for their help in the competition. The twins run up and give him a hug, and then Summer and Winger fly over to give the 3 a flight over Huttsgalor, where we get a final shot of the rescue riders plus Duggar flying through the sky in honor of his achievement. And that's the ending of Season 2. This was a fascinating conclusion to Season 2, as Season 2 in general felt like a pretty by-the-numbers season. Doesn't really deviate anything from Season 1, and to be honest, this season has a lot of episodes that are either forgettable or aren't super notable. But I still think this episode was a very strong ending to this season, really summarizing the whole story of the team and Duggar's relationship, culminating with Duggar adopting the team and giving us this really notable, heartwarming moment. But now, this is the last Netflix season, because the next media I'll be reviewing on are the 3 specials, which all came out in the same year, 2020, which I always believe the lockdown played a factor into why the series focused on specials for this time, which was completely reasonable. Alright, it's time to review the first special of Rescue Riders, called Hunt for the Golden Dragon. And this is a mostly decent special with one major significance that is very notable. Okay, it starts off with Waldondo invading a stationary ship and stealing a map. Which I mentioned before, this wasn't the last we would see of him, so it was cool to see him appear again. But now that he's got a map, he plans to share it with the Rescue Riders, which, oh boy, he's got some nerve after the last time he interacted with them, which left their relationship strained. Anyways, it's the next morning and we're at the roost where everyone wakes up to Burple introducing them a new game he invented, which is searching for a lobster hidden under one of 3 buckets that Burple shuffled. But the monster moving with the bucket on it gave it away. The team asks Burple how he concepted this idea, and he credits Waldondo, which Burple is the first to forgive him. To be fair, Burple wasn't kidnapped by him, unlike his team. Anyways, the team immediately attack him for his attempted kidnapping last time. He does try to explain himself and claim that he'll make it up to them. But because their trust is broken with him, they decide to restrain him in a barrel just to ensure he won't do anything. And they decide to take him over to Marina, where Marina and Waldondo continue their frenemy relationship, spewing unpleasant words to each other before they hug each other. Waldondo finally explains that he paid the team a visit to share them a map, which is a map that leads them to the golden egg. And it's very legendary because it has a specialty of having the golden dragon lay it every 100 years. And because the egg is made of gold, there's going to be evil pirates seeking for it. So the team decide to accept the adventure in hopes of protecting the egg from the pirates. So they take off and they spot an island with several cave entrances, but they also see a pirate ship stationary there. The pirates do see the team and try to attack them, but their captain stops them and recognizes the team as the Rescue Riders, so he invites them onto his ship, and Dak, Layla, Summer, and Winger fly onto it, where they are met with the captain, whose name is Eric, and he tries to give the twins an offering to help him and his crew find the golden egg, but they refuse no matter his pleas. But since the twins rejected Eric's offering, he commands his crew to trap Winger and Summer in nets, and even trap the twins in nets as well. Then the pirates read their map and decide to enter the cave entrance that had a golden framing, assuming that it'll lead to the golden egg. Anyways, Burple, Cutter, and Aggro fly over to the ship where their friends free themselves from the net and examine their options on which cave entrance they should go in. And the team believes the golden framing entrance is a mislead. So after a bit of deliberation, they decide to split off into different entrances, with Dak, Winger, Aggro, and Cutter entering the cave to the right, while Burple, Layla, and Summer enter the cave entrance that has a patch of flowers. And as they head inside, we see another pirate ship approaching the cave. Anyways, with Eric's crew, the cave they entered comprised tangly vines that try to tangle them up, but Eric is able to fight back. Then with Layla, Summer, and Burple, they encounter geysers that are erupting, so they fly around them. And then with Dak, Winger, Aggro, and Cutter, they encounter bugs, which Winger is creeped out by, and we can see it on his face. But knowing how bugs function, they are attracted by light, and Aggro is glowing because she's a fire fairy, so she's attracting them. But they figure an idea to use their lanterns to deviate the attraction from Aggro to the lanterns. The idea works, and they bypass the bugs. Then back with Layla, Summer, and Burple, they make it out of the geyser zone. Then they suddenly fall into a pit, but dragons have wings, so they are able to fly out. Then back with Dak, Winger, Cutter, and Aggro, they reach a dead end, and Summer, Burple, and Layla reunite with them. Then water sprays dust off the supposed dead-end wall that shows a door which was camouflaged by the dust. And there's a finger hole that Dak decides to use to try and open it, and he tricks everyone to believing that he lost his finger, which irritates them. But anyways, he's able to open the door, and just as they're about to enter, a Belgian magnet magnetizes them. And the culprit for this is another pirate crew whose captain's name is Svetlana. And we should remember, we saw her ship approaching the cave earlier, and now she has intercepted the rescue riders. She and her crew enter the room, but there's nothing there, and she demands the rescue riders to hand over the map, and they deny having it. So she and her crew leave the cave, with the rescue riders still stuck on the magnetic Belgium. But Burple is able to spew out his rock that bounces off the walls and is able to release the dragons from their saddles, freeing them so they can also free Dak and Layla. They then see a square carving that resembles the size of a map, and so they place their map on it and it fits perfectly, and the cave makes a small opening where the team could see another island up ahead. Just then, Waldano appears, praising them but then stealing their map and causing a cave-in on his way out, double-crossing them once again. Dak tries to instruct the dragons to fire at the caved-in rocks, but they're ineffective. Which is like, why not try firing at the openings, since it's a clear exit y'all could use, and of all of them, Cutter is the one that's able to figure this out, and the dragons in sync all fire at the small opening, which creates a bigger exit. And so they depart the cave and are flying towards the other island. On their way, they consider Cutter as a perfect leader to guide them on this journey. He's hesitant at first, but then accepts the role. And then the team encounters the other pirate, who I guess they were on their way to the island as well, so the team was way behind at this moment. But all three pirates, in Eric, Svetlana, and Waldando, with their crew, spot the rescue riders and begin attacking them. So Cutter enacts his role as a leader and maneuvers the team around the pirates' attack. And since Cutter is a trickster, he's able to utilize this trait to get all pirates to attack one another. And during this crisis, Layla is able to retrieve the map from Waldando, and the team make it through the pirates unscathed, and now they reach the surface of the island. They are then attacked by some evil sheep who cause Layla to lose grip of her map, which flies away, but Dak and Wing are able to retrieve it while fending off the bad sheep. The team decide to fly over to the other side of the island where they encounter wolves who are golden. And they are no threat to the team as they're willing to guide them to the location of the golden egg. Back with the pirates, they still continue to fight one another, and then they start fighting over a map, which Waldano is able to grab, and he tarnishes it, which really enrages the pirates, but he does state that they don't have any chance because the rescue riders are way ahead, so they're likely to find the egg first. And he's able to convince the pirates to make a truce and build a revolt against the rescue riders. At the island, the wolves lead the team to an entrance that would direct them to the golden egg. And so they enter it, and the interior looks like a temple. And this is where we get to the part where earlier I mentioned that this special had one significant moment. Well, that part is here, where there's buttons with images of dragons on them, and those dragons are cameos of the dragon species from the original Dragons franchise, where we have a hideous Zeppelbag, a Gronko, monstrous nightmare, deadly Natter resembling Stormfly, and a Knife Fury resembling Toothless. And these were really great cameos coming from the How to Train Your Dragons franchise, which was really notable to the audience who were coming from that fan base, including myself. But now that I've highlighted it, let's get back to the point. In order to open the door, the puzzle is to match the dragon species with its dragon class. Layla has the best knowledge of it and opts to do the puzzle. But when Burple and Dak try to help out, they mess it up and causes the walls to close in on them. The door is almost open, but Layla pressed all the tiles except for one that's located at the top of the frame, which Cutter is able to use his spike to trigger it, opening the door completely. And now the team make it into the area where they see the golden egg laying inside a nest. And as they approach closer to inspect it, the golden dragon, who is the mother, flies down and confronts the team and uses her power, which is just gold glitter. But anyways, she introduces herself as Gemma, and the team explains to her that there are pirates approaching to look for her egg. And the team do fly through the ceiling to spot the ships approaching the island. So they try to discuss an idea to steer the pirates away, and they eventually come up with one and request to use Gemma's gold glitter to help out. So the team all fly out with 3 objects that resemble a golden egg. The pirates spot them and pursue the team. Eric and his crew chase after Dak, Winger, and Burple's egg, but they drop it on a sea stack and it breaks, revealing that it was a fake. Svetlana and her pirates pursue Summer, Layla, and Agro, and they cause them to drop their egg onto one of the pirates' helmets, which cracks it open and reveals that it's fake as well. Then all the pirates focus on Burple, who they believe has the real egg. Then an old man who turns out to be Marina in disguise duels Walnano as Burple eventually drops the egg into the ocean and it's gone, which the news disappoints all the pirates. Then the rescue riders fly back to Gemma's home with Marina joining along, and it's revealed that the team's plan was executed perfectly by using 3 fake decoys to lure the pirates away from Gemma's golden egg. And Gemma is thankful to the rescue riders for helping her protect her egg, which is about to hatch, and out comes a baby golden dragon, which is a very nice final moment of this special, and it ends off with the baby dragon and Gemma spewing their golden glitter at the screen, concluding this special. Like I said, this was a very decent one, with that one notable cameo of dragons from the original franchise, which was really cool to see. But I will say, with that cameo, it does kind of contradict the notion of the Rescue Riders universe being non-canon. I do still believe it is, but references like this and another one that happens down the road kind of breaks away the whole concept of this series being uncanonical. But that's just a random point I just want to make. And now let's move on to the second special. Here we go. The next special we'll be talking about is Secret of the Songwings. And it was cool that the creators were able to make this special in the middle of the lockdown. And what makes this special unique is that it focuses on the musical vibes, which was a very interesting change of pace for Rescue Riders. But anyways, it begins with Layla singing a morning song called Nothing Quite Like Home. And it has a good melody to it. And the song ends with Burple scaring Layla and she almost falls off, but he saves her. The team is amazed by Layla's singing and asks her to sing more, but she is too nervous to sing in front of them and heads back into the roost. And we have Burple trying to mimic her singing, which he's bad at. And it's pretty certain that Layla has some stage fright, which I can relate to. Anyways, Aggro heads off and flies over the sea, and she reunites with Cinna and Labyrinth, who are talking to her in a singing tone, because they have been hypnotized, and we can see that because their eyes are purple. The two beg Aggro to join them at an island, and so she accepts and flies towards the island with them. The team are unsure the whereabouts of Aggro, so they go search for her. And Cutter is able to spot her at another island, and they approach her where she has been hypnotized as well, and she leads them through the island where we have the other dragon friends such as Zeppla, Oscar, and even Snoop the Slinkwing, who all have been hypnotized and are singing. To which we have Oscar sing this brief song called You Can't Beat Melodious Sound, in which it ends off with them referring to Cutter as a clown once again. Then as the team are about to depart from this craziness, Aggro leads them to the main area, where we have many dragons chanting as out comes Melodia, who is the Songwing, and she has a really beautiful singing voice, who is voiced by Renee Elise Goldsberry, and she did a really good job voicing this character. But the downside with her singing is that it has the ability to hypnotize anyone to sing along with her. And after she introduces herself, she sings one of the more notable songs, Sing With Me. And her singing is quickly beginning to hypnotize the rest of the Rescue Riders dragons in Summer, Winger, Cutter, and Burple, in which we have them all sing and dance. But her voice does not hypnotize humans like Dak and Layla, but we do eventually find out that she can do it to humans as well. But Dak and Layla are able to snap Winger, Summer, Burple, and Cutter out of Melodia's hypnosis, and they retreat to the beach, where they reflect on what just occurred. Knowing that Melodia's voice did not affect the twins, Dak and Layla decide to confront her and request for her to let their other dragon friends go. They have the conversation with Melodia, and she's fine with any dragon that leaves if they want to, which they don't because they're under her spell, so they want to stay and sing with her. Dak and Layla retreat back to the beach and decide that they're gonna rescue their dragon friends themselves. So Layla draws an outline in the sand so she can explain the plan to them. And her first plan is for Cutter and Burple to sneak in. And the two try their best, but they are eventually caught and have to retreat before they are hypnotized by Melodia's spell. So Layla's next plan is for Dak and Winger to go at night and have them use a tangle vine to rescue their friends, but Dak lands onto Snoop, who was invisible, forcing Dak and Winger to flee, but they are surrounded by the singing dragons just as Melodia pops out of her cave again and sings her song that slowly drifts Winger away into her spell, but Dak snaps him out of it in time. So now Layla goes for her final plan, which is her and Summer swimming through the river, but they're intercepted by Fathom and Gil, who have also been hypnotized. So the girls flee back to the beach, but unfortunately, Summer has now been hypnotized under Melodia's spell since one of the moss that was covering her ears fell off. So now she joins Melodia's singing company. The team are now trying to figure out another way to deal with Melodia. And after Burple continues to sneeze when he's near some flowers, the team concepts an idea to use dragon powder to make Melodia sneeze so they can save their friends. So the team puts the plan into motion with Winger, Cutter, and Burple being a distraction to Melodia where they sing with her without being under her spell. And I will say Winger's singing voice is so good. But we do have Melodia reprising the Sing With Me song just then. Dak Slingshot's sneezing powder at Melodia, making her sneeze. In some of the shots he fired, the hypnotized dragons come to protect her, showing how strong her hypnosis effect is. But with Melodia sneezing, she has no ability to sing at the moment, which gives the team the chance to escort all the hypnotized dragons to the roost. But we do find out that even if the dragons aren't around with Melodia, they are still under her spell. And then all the hypnotized dragons sing a song, Queen of Song, where they sing it for the entire night next to the roost, really giving the team no rest at this point. And they're pretty much exhausted trying to deal with them, and Burple tries another method of just kindly asking them to stop singing, but it was obviously not going to work. But what will work is that the hypnotized dragon singing was able to call over Melodia to the roost. And she sees the town of Huttsgalor and heads over there, so the team immediately fly there too. And they reach the town before she does and begin warning the villagers not to listen to her singing and cover their ears. But instead of acting on it right away, they stupidly question it, which is completely ludicrous. Melodia tries to sing to the town, but humans can't speak dragon, and it turns out she has a specific tune that she can use to hypnotize humans when she sings. And her song for them is called Now Is Time, and her singing voice hypnotizes the humans, turning their eyes purple too. And she decides to take her squad to the roost, effectively taking charge of the rescue riders' home and forcing them to now stay in the maze caves. And with the situation really going downhill for them, they're starting to run out of thoughts on defeating Melodia's power. But then Burple comes up with an idea of making annoying sounds, which obviously contrasts to Melodia's beautiful voice. And the team actually agree with Burple's idea, and they decide to use the baby shriek scales that they borrow from Grumbleguard, which we should all remember, their shrieks are really unpleasant and annoying, so this plan could work out. The team head over to the roost and they have the shriek scales make irritating sounds that slowly makes those who are hypnotized drift away from Melodia's spell, but she then appears and sings her beautiful voice, which overpowers the sound of the shriek scales and re-hypnotizes everyone back into her spell, forcing the rescue riders to retreat once again. And there couldn't be more problems when one of the shriek scales take the moss off of Burple's ears, and now Melodia's voice has hypnotized him too. So now the rescue riders' numbers are beginning to dwindle. So they return back to the maze case where Grumbleguard surprisingly meets them there so he could take back the shriek scales. And he does share some really interesting key information that the best way to defeat Melodia's power is if someone has a better singing voice than her. And all eyes are on Layla since she did sing a song at the beginning of the special and she had really good vocals. Layla knows her singing voice is good, but her stage fright prevents her from singing in front of an audience. But the team try to help build up her self-esteem, and they sing a song, We Believe in You, as a way to pacify her. She does still believe that she's going to struggle singing in front of an audience, so that comes up with an idea to make some adjustments, and the team takes a trip to Magnus and requests to borrow one of his inventions that amplifies a voice. And he is surprisingly accept while he sings the song I Told You So. Anyways, the team take the device into the town's hall where Layla sings into it, which attracts everyone who has been hypnotized. But then once again, Burple has to be the one to interrupt her singing by barrel rolling into the hall and destroying the voice amplifying device, exposing Layla as the singer. Then Melodia sings again, and the situation gets more catastrophic as Dak has now been hypnotized, because when Burple barrel rolled, he knocked over Dak, which took out one of his earplugs. With only Layla, Cutter, and Winger left, they're all dependent on Layla's singing to save the day, and Layla finally overcomes her fear of singing in front of a crowd and sings the song in My Heart, which is another very notable one, as it centers around this dual singing between Layla and Melodia, and it culminates with Layla's singing voice overpowering the Songwings, effectively defeating her hypnosis spell and freeing everyone from it. Everyone who was hypnotized are confused by what occurred, but Layla promises to explain after she deals with Melodia, who we see is now disheveled after losing the singing battle. And it's fully explained that Melodia only used her hypnosis power to make others sing along with her so she wouldn't be lonely since she's been separated from her songmate. Layla promises that her and her team can help Melodia reunite with her songmate, despite her acknowledging the amount of attempts she's tried to call her songmate back. And so, up in the mountains, Melodia and the team use the voice amplifying device to sing for Melodia's songmate. And they sing a song wherever you are. And after they sing a bit, Melodia's songmate Cantata flies out of the crowds and reunites with her fellow Songwing. And this was a really great moment to conclude this amazing special. This was a really fun one to watch, and the aspect of centering around music really worked well for me, and it was such a passion to listen to these amazing songs the characters would sing. And for Melodia's case, I really do feel bad for her, where she's unaware of her own actions is actually causing issues for others, and it's not like she's doing it intentionally. She was just going through a very somber time of her life when she separated from Cantata, but it was great that she was able to reunite with her songmate so she continued living on her lifestyle of singing with her songmate. But now that this special is done, we've got one more to review on. Okay, and finally reviewing the last special of Rescue Riders, and it's called Huttsgalor Holiday, which is obviously Christmas themed, and the episode begins with the dragons sleeping and Summer waking up first. She heads off to start her day, then she screams at the shock of her sight, waking up the other dragons to their concern, and they're all shocked to see that Huttsgalor has snowed. Then Winger's like, you know what that means? It means, and it cuts to him and Cutter sledding down the side of the roost, with Winger calling it a belly sledding. And everyone is having so much fun playing in the snow, making snow angels, snowball fights, and Summer's water turns into ice when she sprays it. And then we have Winger building a snow dragon, but Aggro gets too close to it and her fire melts it, ruining his wonderful creation. Then the team hear bells from the town, and they head over there to see that the townspeople are celebrating Odin Yule, which is their version of calling it Christmas. And we have the villagers making their preps for this holiday. And of course, Magnus has to waltz in with his invention, which this time is a machine that fires out knitted socks. And the socks are actually decently made, but then his machine goes haywire, so Dak and Winger stop it. Magnus isn't happy about this and reprimands Duggard for even inviting the team when the holiday should be only celebrated by villagers, not dragons. Which, come on Magnus, your indignant personality is what ruins the fun, all because of your dragon biases. But Duggar ignores him and invites the team to celebrate Olenil with his townspeople. And then we cut to a montage of the team helping the villagers decorate. And then we finish off with them putting presents on the Odenil tree, which is made out of wooden, when they could have used a real tree. So that was completely arbitrary. Anyways, Fingard arrives and asks the Rescue Riders if he can have a gift of a dragon egg, which they unfortunately say no. But they do have the idea of inviting the adopted baby dragons that are in Grumbleguard's care. So Layla, Summer, and Burple fly over to Hazard Island so they could borrow the baby dragons. Meanwhile, the tree is almost done and Duggar climbs out to put the Oldenil version of the tree topper, which is the Oldenil crown. But just as he's about to place it, a snowstorm occurs and blows Duggar off the tree, but Winger saves him on time. And the storm gets very overwhelming, which causes the villagers to isolate in their homes and the team retreating back to the roost. Then we cut to Grumbleguard's island where it hasn't snowed there, and Grumbleguard is trying to teach the baby dragons how to fly, but they flop at it. Then Layla, Summer, and Burple arrive, where they request to borrow the baby dragons for Odenil, but Grumbleguard refuses, and even exclaims that he dislikes celebrating the holiday. And he also despises the cold, which he then presents the pile of fire fruit he's collected, which these fire fruits did look like pumpkins when I first saw it. But these kind of fruits are really good in the cold weather because they help those who consume them warm up. And it will become more relevant later in the special. Anyways, now that they've been denied borrowing the baby dragons, Layla, Summer, and Burple head back home. And they discover the ruins of the town, all because of the weather. And with the bevy of unpredictable snowstorms, Duggar is resorting to canceling Odenil, but the Rescue Riders don't want him to back down and offer to stop wherever this hazardous snowstorm is originating. And so on the second day of Odenil, people gather around to sing the Odenil carol, which I don't really find interesting. But then we have Layla, Summer, and Burple once again adventuring off together, and this time they're gonna search for the culprit of these snowstorms. They fly for a while until they discover the wind from the storm originating from a cave. So they head inside to investigate, and they discover baby dragons who are identified as chill blasters, who are the main culprits to controlling these snowstorms. The team is just confused why would they do such a thing until the reasoning would be valid when a pack of Arctic wolves chime in to attack the baby chill blasters. The team tries to help them out with Burple trying to do a rotation attack using snowballs, and it only hits one of the wolves. So then Summer resorts to using her water, which would freeze, but it actually worked to their benefit, knocking back the wolves, buying the team enough time to rescue the chill blasters before they could come back. Just then, back at Huttsgalor, Magnus returns to retest his sock machine, and it seemed to have improved, but then it just goes back to functioning hazardly again. So once again, Dak and Waiter stop it by destroying it this time, much to Magnus's annoyance. Then, the townspeople gather around the tree again, just as Layla, Summer, and Burple return back with the Chill Blasters. Fingar is stoked to see these baby dragons, assuming it was the gift the Rescue Riders promised him, but Layla breaks the news that the Chill Blasters were the main culprits of the storms. Then, things would get more worse when the base of the Odinule tree cracks and falls over. And I'm thinking to myself, they should have just went with the real tree to begin with, like I mentioned earlier. Then the team decided to take the Chill Blasters and Fingar to the roost to deal with their situation. Then, just as things look dire, Albon comes in to somewhat save the day and offers to ride his ship to the northern markets so he could collect the presents and ship them back to Huttsgalor in time. But because it's Albon, he's probably not gonna get through this mission smoothly. Then Dak offers to give Duggart a surprise for a replacement tree. At the roost, Fingar is having fun with the Chill Blasters, where Layla and Summer are still trying to figure out a solution. Just then, the baby Chill Blasters blow their snowy steam into the air, which makes Layla and Summer realize that the babies are trying to make a signal for their guardian, and they assume that the babies are signaling for their mother. Then back in town, Dak presents Duggart a real tree they could use for Odinule, which now this is more traditional. Anyways, the team helped decorate the tree. Then Layla and Summer arrive back in town to explain to the team about the situation with the Chill Blasters. Considering how dangerous the journey could be, the team offered to temporarily leave them under Grumbleguard, much to his dismay. And to add on top of that, they're gonna leave Fingar there as well, a human trial interacting with an old dragon who doesn't understand dragon language. So there's nothing Grumbleguard can do to communicate with Fingar, and all he can do is just suffer with Fingar's annoying behavior. Then the team are flying up north, where the dragons humorously do an impression of Grumbleguard's voice, just as they spot Elrond's boat stuck in the middle of ice. And he gives them the explanation on how he got into this mess, describing that a dragon with icy powers froze his boat on the way back. Which, from a viewer's perspective, connecting the dots, it should be easily known that the dragon he's describing about is the Chill Blaster's guardian. And so the team decides to split off, with Layla, Summer, and Burple searching for the mother Chill Blaster, while Dak, Winger, Cutter, and Aggro stay back to daw Albon's ship. So Layla, Summer, and Burple arrive at a sea stack zone, where they finally find the Chill Blaster's guardian, and it's actually the father, whose name is Chilbert. And he's suffering the cold that makes him uncontrollably sneeze ice, so this does explain why he caused Albon's ship to be frozen. It was all accidental. And with Chilbert sick, it has grounded him from flying, and every time Layla, Summer, and Burple try to carry him, there's no progress. Especially on their last attempt, to where Chilbert sneezes ice onto Burple, freezing him in ice, leading to Layla having to break him out with a rock. Then suddenly, Layla comes up with the idea to use the fire fruit, which we should remember, it warms up anyone who eats it. So they head back to Hazard Island to collect them from Grumbleguard. Back with the others, we see the dragons try everything they can to free Albon's boat, but to no success. So back with Hazard Island, Layla, Summer, and Burple arrive to retrieve the baby Chill Blasters and Fingar, and to borrow some fire fruit, which Grumbleguard allows. Then as the team leaves, Fingar lets Grumbleguard know he left him a present, which is a snow dragon that resembles the Forever Horn, making him slowly recognize the values of this holiday. They return the baby Chill Blasters to Chilbert and feed him the fire fruit, which cures his sneezing. He thanks the team for their help and heads off with his babies. Then the team fly back to Elblum's frozen boat to reunite with the others. And with no progress, it doesn't seem like they're gonna arrive with the presents for Odenjul in time. Then Leyland concepts another idea, which is using Elblum's rope to attach the dragons to the boat, which this case resembles reindeers carrying Santa's sleigh, with the dragons being the reindeers and the boat obviously being the sleigh, which I'm very surprised I didn't realize that at first. So the dragons try pulling the boat and they only move it an inch, and they are struggling a bit, but then suddenly they're able to break free the boat from the ice and fly it through the sky, and it's then revealed to us that they were given a boost from wind that was blown from Grumbleguard. So that was such a big help from him. Then it's the next morning, and as the townspeople are waiting, they see the team arrive with a boat full of presents. They do make a rough landing and the boat destroys one of the banners, but either way, the presents have arrived and the team and Elbow hand them over to the townspeople. As the villagers begin to sing their carol, Finked is still upset that he didn't get his baby dragon gift. Then suddenly, Grumbleguard arrives with a baby dragon, giving the kind of gift Finked wanted. And the team convinced Grumbleguard to stay as well and give him a gift, which is a sock they put on his tail to keep him warm. And with that, everyone gathers around the tree to sing, and the special ends right there. I had so much excitement coming into this special, and I was having fun on the initial watch, but as I rewatch it, I am kind of more lower on it, where the first half is pretty consistent and it has some really compelling plot lines, but then the back half kind of slows down the pacing, not really providing much strong intrigue. But besides that, it was a very enjoyable Christmas special, especially since this came out near the end of 2020, which we all know how bad that year was. And during that time, I was having a miserable time with other shows I watched where those seasons were really bad. So it was nice enough for Rescue Riders to chime in with this special where it helped restore my entertainment. And with that, this was the final Rescue Riders product made for Netflix. And that is it. All the Rescue Riders media related to Netflix. Like I said, this show is targeted towards younger children, so that's why the humor is more juvenile and why it is non-canon to the original Dragons franchise. And I do understand the negativity surrounding it, but for me, I had a fun time watching this show. Yes, there were some problems, and it is not something I grew up with, but I do get some semblance of enjoyment from this spin-off, especially since it contains some characters who I look at with very high regard, in the likes of Winger, Layla, Agro, Summer. And we also had some decently strong episodes, like both Grumbleguard Part 1 and 2, Summer Holiday, and even Game of Horns. But then we do have a bit of mediocre episodes like Home Alone and Charged Up. But besides that, I still found a lot of enjoyment from this series. But now that I have covered the Netflix series of this show, it has moved on to a new program, Peacock, and has been branded as Heroes of the Sky, which is described as a spin-off of this spin-off. So that sounds very abnormal, but I will be making a review on that series so I can complete the full review of the Rescue Riders franchise. So stay tuned for that review, which will likely come out on the anniversary month, just like this video. And that's my review for the Netflix show Dragons Rescue Riders. I had a really thrilling time rewatching this show and learning some new stuff that I missed on the initial watch. So that's all I've got to say, and I thank everyone who watched me review every episode and special of Dragons Rescue Riders and giving my overall thoughts and opinions on each of them. Some may be controversial and others are probably agreeable. But with that, I hope y'all enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for tuning in.